couple of months, much yen strength to come through. So that largely leaves things like the dollar, the Swiss francs, as you kind of mentioned, as probably more of the true safe havens. I think particularly from the dollar against emerging market currencies, I still think the dollar is still going to be the safest play that people view in terms of where they're going to be putting their money if they become concerned about the economic cycle, if they become concerned about the US-China trade conflict as well.
Hear more interviews like this one on Bloomberg Television, streaming live on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg mobile app, or check your local cable listings.
Markets, headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app and at TikTok on Twitter. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg's European headquarters in London, I'm Sandra Kilhoff. Time for a Bloomberg Radio Business Flash. Now over to the First Word breaking news desk in Berlin. For today's morning call, here's Richard Jones.
Good morning, Sandra. Asian equities are lower across the board, with ongoing turbulence in Hong Kong weighing on the Hang Seng Index, which is trading lower by just under 2%. The Nikkei 225 traded lower by 0.9%, as did the Kospi, with the Shanghai Composite down 0.3%. U.S. equity futures are also ticking lower, with E-mini, S&P, and NASDAQ futures both down about 0.2%. European equities have also opened weaker, with the Euro Stoxx 50, the DAX, and the CAC all trading lower by 1 to 0.2%, with the FTSE 100 down by 0.4. Looking at the sector breakdown in Europe, losses are being led by banks, media, and autos. Turning to bond markets, the U.S. 10-year yield is trading 2 basis points lower at 1.92%, as is the German Bund yield, down 2 basis points at minus 0.27%. In the FX space, the Bloomberg Dollar Index is trading little changed, with the New Zealand dollar a notable outperformer, rising over 1% versus the greenback after the RBN said unexpectedly left interest rates unchanged. In terms of data, the final October German CPI was in line with the preliminary readings. We also get Sweden and UK CPI, in addition to Euro area industrial production this morning. We'll hear from the Riksbank's Deputy Governor Floden and, of course, from Fed Chairman Powell later this afternoon. That's it for me. For more macro breaking news, it's SQUA Go on the Bloomberg Terminal. Sandra?
Thanks, Richard. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Leanne Garrins with more on what's going on around the world.
Sandra, thank you. Boris Johnson will deliver his first keynote speech of the election campaign later, promising to end the groundhoggery of Brexit. The Prime Minister will say a Conservative government will unleash Britain's potential. Labour's announcing plans to put another £26 billion into health funding, paid for by higher taxes from top earners. And the Lib Dems say they would invest £500 million in combating knife crime. New Delhi is choking once again. The air quality reading rose above 400 on Tuesday, about 8 times the internationally accepted safe level. Winds blowing from the northwest brought smoke from burning rice fields in nearby states, piling pressure on the government to now find a solution. And large parts of Venice are flooded after being hit by the city's highest tide in more than 50 years. It peaked at more than 6 foot last night, forcing many visitors to use temporary platforms above the water. The mayor of the popular tourist destination says he will declare a state of disaster and is warning of severe damage. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and at TikTok, on Twitter, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Garrins. This is Bloomberg Naira.
Leanne, thank you. Let's turn to oil, and we are seeing a little bit of weakness today. WTI and Brent both off by at least 0.3%. WTI trading at 56.62, Brent at 61.77. So oil down for a third day. We didn't really get any clear signals or fresh details from President Trump on trade negotiations with China yesterday. And of course, what's been weighing on oil for a while is concerns around demand. Well, the IEA is predicting global oil demand will hit a plateau around 2030. The agency says growth will see a marked slowdown after 2025 and ebb to just 100,000 barrels a day in just over a decade. For more, let's bring in Bloomberg energy reporter Stephen Stupczynski. Stephen, great to have you with us. So take us through the details of the report. What does the IEA say is going to lead the drop in oil demand growth?
Thanks for having me on. This is going to mostly be driven by 2 factors. One is vehicles, and 2 is China. For vehicles, we have more efficient vehicles being developed that will use less gasoline. At the same time, you also have the emergence of electric vehicles that will require no gasoline at all. So those 2 main factors are going to you're really cutting a lot of the demand going into 2030. At the same time, the IEA said that in their report they see a cliff in a way of Chinese demand for oil dropping. And this is significant because oil demand growth has been underpinned by China over the last 2 decades. And without China as a big growth market, there's no one else to really pick that up. So with those two put together, they're expecting a plateau.
So, Stephen, in those circumstances, if the oil producers are having a pretty gloomy morning reading this, is there any bright spot they can look to?
Well, the one slight bright spot is because reserves are shrinking, oil producers are going to have to go and drill new wells. What this is going to do is it's actually going to prop up the price of oil. So right now, Brent is trading around $60. By 2030, the IEA expects that it will average about $90. And then by 2040, we'll be back in the $100 range, about $104. So despite this weaker demand, you're going to see actually a jump in price, or a gradual increase in prices over the next 2 decades.
Yeah, so $90 in 2030, $103 a barrel in 2040. What I thought was interesting as well in the report, Stephen, is that it said the US will account for 85% of the growth in production worldwide to 2030 as its shale oil boom continues, and that US production is going to reach 20.9 million barrels a day in 2025 when its combined exports of crude and refined oil will overtake Saudi Arabia's. Now that brings me on to Aramco. How will this new information affect investors' interest in Aramco, especially given the fact that Aramco just very recently gave its own outlook for demand, saying that it could peak in 2035. It was using IHS data.
I think that the idea of peak oil and the idea of plateauing oil isn't anything terribly new. You have 2 different factors and many different factors going into how you make these analysis. And the difference between 2030 and 2035 isn't terribly different. The main thing is, and the market's known this for years, is that oil demand is going to fall as people shift away from gasoline vehicles and as global markets like China shifts to different fuels. So, of course, this will be on the mind of all investors. This IPO is huge, and the Saudi government had been issuing these soon, so we're going to be looking into how exactly this will affect their price and how it will go into the market.
Stephen, of course, the other end of all this is, of course, the result of burning fossil fuels. What does the IEA say about greenhouse gas pollution?
They expect greenhouse gas pollution to actually continue to increase over the next 2 decades through 2040. They don't expect it to slow down significantly despite the drop in oil demand. So it's a bit of a gloomy picture. The reason for this is because developing nations are going to be looking at using more coal. Now, of course, developed nations around the world are shifting to cleaner energies, but despite that, you're still going to see greenhouse gas and CO2 emissions continue to rise through 2040, according to the IEA.
Great to have you with us. Stephen Stawczynski with the latest on the IEA oil report, talking about peak demand. Thank you so much for joining us. More Daybreak Europe next. As we look ahead to the markets, we're seeing a little bit of a down day in equities. The Stock 600 is lower. This is Bloomberg.
This is a Bloomberg Market Minute. Stocks resume trading with the major averages at or near all-time highs. The Dow Jones Industrial Average starts at 27,691, unchanged from Monday. The S&P 500 gained 5. The Nasdaq Composite is at a record, up 22 yesterday. We'll hear from Fed Chair Jerome Powell today as he testifies before the Joint Economic Committee of Congress. He's likely to signal again that interest rates are on hold after the Fed lowered interest rates last month. The earnings calendar is light as the quarterly reporting season winds down. We'll hear from Canada Goose before the opening and Cisco Systems after the close. And the government reports on October consumer prices. The meal kit subscription business is shrinking. Albertsons is pulling its Plated brand out of that market at the end of the month. Plated will shift its focus to putting its meal kits in Albertsons supermarkets, including Safeway, Vons, Shaw's, and Acme. Larry Kofsky, Bloomberg Radio.
What if you could keep the top economic experts in a conference room next to your office without having to feed them?
Do we need better optics? Do we need some substance? Do CEOs care about ESG?
We have seen quite a lot of stimulus pumped into the system already.
It's the biggest warning yet about the financial risks of climate change.
Now there are more ways to hear us. Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business, Radio.com, and iHeartRadio apps, and at BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
Inovalon is a leading provider of cloud-based platforms empowering data-driven healthcare. Leveraging deep connectivity, the data of billions of medical events, and advanced analytics, Inovalon empowers the achievement of improved clinical outcomes and financial performance for thousands of health insurance companies, hospitals, doctors, pharmacies, and pharmaceutical companies, and the millions of patients they serve every day. Inovalon. Data has a story to tell. We give it a voice. Learn more at inovalon.com.
Why has
Tis the season to be hunched over your laptop. Not on our watch. In real life, you can fill your senses and your baskets. Feel all the sights, sounds, lols, and OMGs. Wear laughing emojis on actual smiley faces. Battery is running low. Take the kids to Santa's Grotto. In real life, you can find just the right present using the most advanced search engine in the world. Your eyes. We heart in real life. Brent Cross, London. Free parking for all sleighs and cars.
When it comes to music, I've heard it all. Pink Floyd, Sean Paul, Slipknot. But in the Which Test Lab, hearing isn't enough. When we test headphones, we really listen. Not just to the music, but to the stuff that gets in the way. The traffic, the chatter, all that. Mind the gap. We simulate the loudest commute to find you the headphones that cancel out the noise. So you know we're only recommending the best.
Which tests harder, so you can buy smarter. Visit which.co.uk.
If you're planning on driving this weekend, expect delays on the A406 North Circular Road. There'll be road closures between Edmonton and Tottenham from 10 p.m. on Friday the 15th of November to 5 a.m. on Monday the 18th of November, while we carry out essential maintenance and repairs. All roads in the surrounding area will be extremely busy, so please allow more time for your journey and expect delays in the area. Plan ahead and check alternative routes at tfl.gov.uk. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters.
This is the sound of festive fun in London. You want to keep your savings for the things you love this Christmas, not a new boiler. We're with you. So our boilers come with 2 years interest-free credit to keep your savings for a Merry Christmas. You'll get a 5-year British Gas warranty, and now we can quote by video call evenings or weekends. Get a quote by the 30th of November and get £150 off a new boiler, or £450 off for existing home care customers. Search British Gas New Boiler. Conditions apply.
It's one small step for man, one giant shop. Sorry, 2 giant shops a month at 10% off with the new Tesco Club Card Plus. Oh, and double data from Tesco Mobile, all for $7.99 every month.
New Tesco Club Card Plus. Value you can't stop talking about. Subscribe online today. £200 max spend per shop, in-store spend only. Club card app required. Exclusions apply. Double data only on pay monthly. Home from home destinations. First payment payable up front, subject to status. See online for details.
Should we go halves?
I'll get this. Let me just get my card. Which was in my pocket.
You can't control awkward first dates. But if you temporarily misplace your debit card, you can freeze and unfreeze it on our mobile banking app. Feel in control every day. Lloyds Bank, by your side. You can only freeze some transaction types. T's and C's apply.
Broadcasting live to London on DAB Digital Radio, to New York, Bloomberg 1130, to Washington DC, Bloomberg 99.1, to Boston, Bloomberg 106.1, to San Francisco, Bloomberg 960, and around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
8:30 a.m. in London, 9:30 if you're listening in Paris, Frankfurt or Brussels. Good morning, everyone. I'm Naira Chehich.
And I'm Roger Hearing, and you're listening to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
30 minutes into the equity market open here in Europe, and we're looking at a bit of a down day for the Stock 600, weaker by 0.3% after gains yesterday across regional equity benchmarks. A lot of red on the screen. FTSE 100 weaker by 0.4%. The CAC 40 lower by 0.1%. The DAX lower by about 0.25 percentage point. The IBEX leads losses down almost 1%, and the FTSE MIB lower by 0.3%. 0.1%. We did see a small gain in the S&P 500 yesterday. It closed just shy of a record, but futures point to a weaker open. Dow and S&P E-mini futures lower by almost 0.2%. Nasdaq futures lower by about the same. President Trump didn't really give clear signals on where the trade talks with China were going, saying we could see a deal, but equally tariffs could be hiked if there was no phase one deal. And it's interesting that we're seeing a little bit of a back foot to these markets when the Bank of America Merrill Lynch survey showed that investors were suffering from FOMO, fear of missing out, and coming back into equity markets after being on the sidelines for most of the year. Cash levels dropping to the lowest since 2013, and global growth expectations also hitting a record. In Asia, we've definitely seen a down day, particularly led by the Hang Seng with a third day of protests. The 10-year Treasury yield is down 1.5 basis points, 192 handle. The 10-year Bund yield slips a basis point to negative 26. The 10-year gilt yield is steady, but we are seeing some of that risk-off reflected in the bond markets. Taking a look at currencies, we saw some dollar strength yesterday following President Trump's speeches. We've seen that hold a little bit today, but the New Zealand dollar bucking the trend in G10, jumping more than 1%, the most in 9 months after the RBNZ unexpectedly held rates. And we're seeing some weakness in oil for a third day. WTI trading at 56.63, Brent at 61.76. Expecting a gain in American inventories this week. We've also had the IEA talk about global demand growth peaking in 2030. Roger.
Well, let's go on to some of today's top stories. Now, Wall Street bond traders will be watching both Fed Chairman Jerome Powell and the impeachment hearings today. But Powell's appearance before Congress's Joint Economic Committee probably has more potential to move the markets. Investors are looking for confirmation that Powell plans to pause interest rate hikes next month.
And as I was just mentioning, the International Energy Agency says global oil demand will likely plateau around 2030. It says the current growth rate of about 1% will hold for the next 5 years, but the IEA sees lower demand growth in the 2030s after the use of oil-based fuels in passenger cars has peaked. And it sees global demand for coal rising into the 2040s on current trends. The other reason, of course, for the demand peaking is not just less use of oil in passenger cars, but also slowing demand from China. And interestingly, in the report, when they talked about where the demand would come from, they said it would be mainly in the aviation and plastics industries, among others, Roger.
And plastic being another environmental concern, of course, and pushes to get rid of.
As well as aviation.
All ties up together.
Yeah.
Now, another corporate news, AbbVie kicked off a mega bond sale to help finance its $63 billion acquisition of Allergan. Bloomberg is reporting it's selling $30 billion in senior unsecured notes in as many as 10 parts. Investors flocked to buy a piece of the year's largest debt sale. The order book peaked at $77 billion.
And 3G Capital has a new elevator pitch. The private equity firm known for buying food giants like Kraft and Burger King is vying for ThyssenKrupp's elevator unit, according to People Familiar. 3G is competing against a number of other firms and strategic bidders.
Well, for more on this story, let's go live now to Berlin, where Bloomberg Opinion's Chris Bryant's standing by. So, Chris, good morning to you. Now, why would this private equity group, which has mostly been in the North American fast food area, Kraft, Burger King, why would they suddenly be interested in the German lift business?
Good morning. I mean, it's a very interesting question. I think it speaks to the attractiveness of this target. ThyssenKrupp is under pressure to sell assets to generate cash, very indebted, big pension deficit and so forth. Its prize asset is this elevator business, and by announcing that effectively he's going to put it up for sale, it's also considering a potential IPO. But I think a sale is probably considered more likely. It's drawn a who's who of the private equity world. Now, of course, nobody expected 3G Capital to join in because, as you suggest, in the past they've been very focused on consumer goods companies, Burger King, the beer companies, and Kraft Heinz most famously. But of course, things have not gone so well for them lately in that department. Kraft Heinz has been a bit of big flop, big write-down and so forth. So I suppose it's not so surprising that they're now looking perhaps to other sectors to generate returns. And the elevator deal could be a very attractive one for them, not least it's a very consolidated market, and so profit margins are reasonably good.
Yeah, and Chris, you know, what's interesting if we look at ThyssenKrupp as a whole is that a lot of people have sort of pointed to the fact that the demise of the industrial icon has laid bare the fault lines in Germany's economy. And of course, we are awaiting this week data that might show that Germany slipped into a technical recession. So against that economic backdrop, is this asset, the elevator business, is that sort of shielded from the impact of the economic slowdown in Germany?
Well, yes, it is to a fair degree. Obviously, ThyssenKrupp's steel business not doing very well at the moment. The car parts business not doing very well. Those are really hit by these trends, trade wars, export slowdown, and so forth. Elevators is a bit different. Obviously, a very global business, as I said, also very consolidated, and so the profit margins are good. But any potential bidder would hope to improve that. And if we know one thing about 3G Capital, it's it likes to cut costs. That also speaks, though, to the difficulty of doing this deal, namely that the trade unions, as with all German companies, have a lot of say in over supervisory board decisions, who they would have to approve any deal. And frankly, the prospect of a 3G Capital bid for this company is going to put the chills through the trade unions, because the one thing that, as I said, that they're famous for is cutting costs and also cutting jobs.
But 3G, Chris, also famous for being pretty canny on these things. I mean, they clearly see something worthwhile here.
Well, yes, they do, but they're also competing against a lot of other private equity bidders, all of whom, I think, see the same potential, which is that ThyssenKrupp, compared to its peers, margins are lower, so clearly any bidder can come in there, slash costs, boost margins at what's famously a fairly, a company that's happy to spend money. They could run a much tighter ship. Down the track also, they might consider then a merger with Kona, the other European leader in this business. ThyssenKrupp doesn't want to go down that route at the moment, despite Kona's interest, because it fears a very prolonged antitrust decision would impair its ability to generate cash. But any private equity buyer with a longer time frame might consider that.
Bloomberg Opinions. Chris Bryant joining us from Berlin. Thank you so much. Now for the latest in global news, here's Bloomberg's Leanne Gerrans. Leanne.
Good morning, Naira. Hong Kong has announced a suspension of all schools in the city. This as Security Chief John Lee warns of unthinkable consequences if violence continues. Earlier, commuters packed onto the first trains amid calls by activists to impede rush hour traffic in a show of anger over police tactics. Crossing over to Europe now, Spain might have a government faster than many expected. Acting Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez on Tuesday signed an agreement to form a coalition government with the anti-establishment party Podemos. Bloomberg's Jeanette Newman reports.
The potential breakthrough came only 2 days after Spain held general elections. Spaniards had elected a very divided parliament, so many were expecting drawn-out talks to form a government. The announcement also caught investors by surprise. Investors are wary of some of the economic policies espoused by Podemos. Sanchez and Podemos leader Pablo Iglesias still need the support of other parties to form a left-wing government. It looks likely that they will succeed. In Madrid, this is Jeanette Newman for Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
Lebanese President Michel Aoun has sparked public anger by calling on demonstrators to give up and go home. His comments sparked a new surge of unrest, which claimed the very first death. Demonstrators reacted by blocking roads and setting fires across the country, restating demands for the removal of corrupt leaders. And Turkey is looking to turn the page on a period of strife with the US as President Erdogan prepares to meet Donald Trump in D.C. That's happening later today. Bloomberg's Simon Demakan has more.
Turkey's relationship with the US has been strained by a series of rows, from disagreement over the Turkish offensive in Syria to Ankara''s decision to purchase the advanced S-400 missile system. The S-400 issue will top the agenda. President Erdogan has insisted the Russian system will be activated soon, defying calls from Washington to hold off. In Istanbul, Simon Demakan, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
Global news 24 hours a day, on air and at TikTok, on Twitter, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg of Roger.
Leanne, thank you for that. And we're getting some very interesting lines coming over the terminal, Naira, on Cathay Pacific. Their second half results will be significantly below their first half, apparently. Their Hackathon 2019 has been cancelled. There's a lot of deals coming through on this, suggesting the problems, I guess, coming from the Hong Kong situation are considerable.
Well, yeah, they're saying that the short-term outlook remains challenging and that advanced bookings continue to show weakness. Some of the other details that we're getting here is that Cathay Pacific October passenger traffic down 7.1%, but the main red headline to focus on is that the second half results are to be significantly slightly below the first half. So that is what we've been getting through from Cathay Pacific. In terms of the markets more broadly, Roger, we're 40 minutes into the equity market open here in Europe, and the Stock 600 continuing to show some weakness, down 0.3%. You were mentioning Hong Kong in terms of the Asian session. That's where most of the weakness was, with Hong Kong shares hitting a month low. Volatility has been rising as well, and we've dropped through some technical factors on the Hang Seng. Up next, we'll talk more markets as we hear from President Trump on trade. This is Bloomberg.
My name is Hunter Hayes. I know myself, and I know my buzzed warning signs. One shot is about knowing my limits, or not necessarily knowing my limits.
I start with one shot to have a good time.
One of the signs that I'm starting to feel a little buzz is when I start solving not only my own problems, but the entire world's problems. When I know I'm going out, I know I'm going to start with calling for a ride. Buzz driving is drunk driving. A message brought to you by NHTSA and the Ad Council.
Portfolio Analyst, powered by Interactive Brokers, helps sophisticated investors understand the health of their complete financial portfolio. Portfolio Analyst is free and easy-to-use personal finance software that creates a consolidated view of banking, brokerage, and credit card accounts. Compare your consolidated portfolio against more than 200 benchmarks or create customized benchmarks for analyzing performance. Calculate time and money-weighted rates of return and use Portfolio Analyst for forecasting. Sign up for free at portfolioanalyst.com.
Rich is just a really good guy. The term good egg isn't enough to describe him. He's also certified organic and free range. Rich puts the cap back on everything. The toothpaste, the olive oil, the shampoo, everything. He lets his 10-year-old nephew beat him at virtual tennis, even though he can straight up slay his 10-year-old nephew in virtual tennis. When the toilet paper is running low, Rich replaces the roll on the actual holder, not just on the back of the toilet. Rich is texting and driving. Rich, no. What are you doing, Rich? I was just telling everyone how great you are. Texting and driving makes good people look bad. Visit StopTextStopWrecks.org. A public service announcement brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
I've got to tell you about our beautiful city break in Bath. Midweek is the perfect time to beat the crowds. Just an hour and a half by train from London. It was so relaxing. We headed straight for Bath Christmas Market. Oh, I can still smell the roasted chestnuts and mulled wine from the chalets. Then it was time for glow-in-the-dark mini-golf. I got a hole-in-one. Well, 3. I'm a bit rusty, okay? There's so much to do in Bath. I'm already planning my next trip.
Discover the magic of Bath this Christmas. Plan ahead at visitbath.co.uk/Christmas.
They don't chant your name when you give blood, or sing songs about you. But patients and their families will remember you forever. Because your blood can change their lives. We need more blood donors in Tooting, the West End and Edgware. Bleed for London. Join us today at blood.co.uk.
'Tis the season to be hunched over your laptop. Not on our watch. In real life, you can fill your senses and your baskets. Feel all the sights, sounds, lols, and OMGs. Wear laughing emojis on actual smiley faces. Battery is running low. Take the kids to Santa's Grotto. In real life, you can find just the right present using the most advanced search engine in the world. Your eyes. We hunt in real life. Brent Cross, London. Free parking for all sleighs and cars.
This winter, why not take the short flight from London to Dublin with Aer Lingus from just $32.99 each way as part of a return trip. From coastal walks to cozy pubs and friendly locals, you'll find so much to enjoy once you're there. Smart takes a Dublin city break. Smart flies Aer Lingus. Book now at airlingus.com. Terms and conditions apply.
The S in Audi S-Line stands for many things like sporty, stylish, streamlined, and now seductively priced. Like the new Audi A4 S-Line, which you can now have from £359 per month, £2,154 initial rental. Test drive one at your local Audi centre, but you'll have to be swift. The offer ends soon. Search Audi S-Line. Audi, Vorsprung durch Technik. With 48-month contract hire, 10,000 miles per annum, 18s and over, subject to status. Damage charges may apply. No ownership. Ordered by 31st of December 2019 from participating centres. Audi Financial Services. Visit audi.co.uk.
Rainy, 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 rainy.
Sergey, why are you in such a good mood?
It's raining.
And?
Rain means we take mealpups to cinema. And cinema means they'll be entertained.
Ah, and entertained means they're also quiet for a couple of hours. Oh, let's go. Enjoy more time together with 2-for-1 cinema tickets from Meerkat Movies with the Meerkat app when you buy through Compare the Market. Qualifying purchases, Tuesdays or Wednesdays, participating cinemas, 2 standard tickets only, cheapest free. T's and C's apply.
No one wants to wait and wait and wait for that perfect phone. Thankfully, the Tesco Mobile Black Friday event has started already. You can find loads of brilliant phone and SIM deals with low monthly prices and big savings, including time-limited weekly deals. Tesco Mobile's best ever Black Friday event is on. Go in store or search Tesco Mobile. Tesco Mobile. Every little helps.
Best ever Black Friday based on range of products and length of promotional period. See tescomobile.com/terms.
Stuck in traffic during the big game? With TuneIn Premium, you can listen to your favorite NFL team on the go. No TV required. Even during rush hour, you won't miss a single touchdown. Listen to the NFL on TuneIn Premium today.
Get social with TuneIn. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for the latest and greatest audio on the app. Explore exclusive content. Learn about hot new podcasts and get alerted when the big game, well, it's about to begin. Add TuneIn to your feed and be in the know when it matters most.
Is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg's European headquarters in London, I'm Sandra Kilhoff with this Bloomberg Radio Business Flash. Now, European equity markets very much in the red. The Stock 600 DAX and the FTSE all sliding 0.4%. The CAC 40 down 0.2%. We're also seeing US futures pointing to a lower open, and it all follows a down day in Asian trading after President Trump warned of further tariff hikes if a US-China trade deal isn't reached. We're still seeing the Hang Seng trading down 1.8%. Investors there really concerned as the city faces a third day of heightened tensions. Now, in stocks, there's quite a bit to keep an eye on. British Land down 1.7% after the UK commercial landlord reported disappointing earnings. Meanwhile, Taylor Wimpey slightly higher. We're also seeing ABN AMRO slipping more than 3% in Amsterdam. So quite a bit of movement if you look around there. Now, in currencies, it's all about the Kiwi dollar today, gaining more than 1% after the RBNZ kept interest rates on hold. Economists in a Bloomberg survey had expected a rate cut, so quite a bit of a surprise for the markets. Meanwhile, the offshore yuan is back above 7 again, fairly unfazed by that trade sentiment from Donald Trump. We're seeing the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index strengthening again today after its overnight advance. The yen, meanwhile, slightly lower, down 0.1% at 109.1 against the greenback. The pound also ticking lower at 1.283. 10-year Treasury yields slipping 2 basis points to 1.92%. 10-year bund yields also moving lower, currently down a basis point at negative 26. 10-year gilt yields down a basis point at 80 basis points. Gold is bid at $1,460 a troy ounce. Finally, oil ticking lower. WTI down 0.4% at $56 a barrel. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Leanne Gerrans with more on what's going on around the world. Sandra, thank you. Australia's highest court has agreed to hear an appeal from the most senior Catholic to be found guilty of sexually abusing children. This gives Cardinal George Pell his last chance at getting his convictions now overturned. The decision comes nearly a year after a unanimous jury found Pope Francis's former finance minister guilty of molesting 2 boys back in the 90s. Americans get their first look at witness testimony against President Trump. That's today. The House Intelligence Committee begins public hearings in the impeachment inquiry. First up, the top U.S. diplomat in Ukraine, William Taylor. He has told lawmakers the administration withheld aid to Ukraine over political investigations. And finally, global greenhouse gas pollution rose for a second year in a row. That ended a lull in emissions. And according to the International Energy Agency, that puts the world on track for further increases through 2040. The IEA says the solution is for governments to now take a radical action. Global News 24 hours a day, on air and at TikTok, on Twitter, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg Naira.
Leanne, thank you so much. And yeah, we have been talking about that IEA report all hour, haven't we, Roger? And what is interesting is while they see the demand slowing from China and also as a result of less use of oil in cars, they actually see the demand being held up in aviation, plastics and shipping, which is interesting because if we're moving to a greener world...
Well, plastics are supposed to be,
yes, exactly.
Single-use plastics are supposed to be a non-starter, so it's coming at both directions.
Exactly. But let's carry on the conversation, the markets conversation, with our guest this hour, Catherine Young, Investment Director at Fidelity, joining us now in the London studio. Catherine, welcome to the show. Really great to have you here. We are seeing a little bit of a down day in Asia, led by the Hang Seng due to a third day of protests, but a little bit of the risk-off sentiment we're seeing perhaps is down to the lack of clarity that we got from President Trump yesterday, saying that, look, if we don't get a phase one, we're going to hike tariffs, but we could still see a deal. How does all the back and forth over the trade negotiations impact your investing strategy in China at the moment?
Well, in terms of this toing and froing relationship we have seen between the United States and China, it is likely to continue over the long term too. So even if we see over the short term a resolution to the tariffs situation, the competitive nature between these two economies is going to see at times markets have volatile periods because of, as you just pointed out, this rhetoric, toing and froing. So investors should be mindful of that. From a portfolio construction perspective, though, when you look across both our China funds and our regional portfolios, the revenue streams really are very much focused on the domestic story within Asia versus exports.
And I mean, earlier guest on the program was talking about peak trade wars. I think we passed peak trade war. Do you get that sense that going forward towards 2020 that is true?
Trade war, when we talk about tariffs, but if we think about it in the most simplistic way, over the long term, this new norm we find ourselves in, it's going to be Make America Great Again versus China's Made in 2025 strategy, because both economies and their manufacturers are competing in the same space, i.e. the high-end part of the value chain.
Yeah, and you mentioned the domestic economy, so you do see the kind of consumption theme intact, and we did, I suppose, see that to a certain extent in what we saw from Alibaba's Singles Day and also from the last set of earnings. Companies climbing the value chain you like, but you also like old economy names. What's of interest there?
It's been an interesting couple of years when we look at the Chinese equities market. So we've had a very extreme crowded trade from a market observation. So if you're a value contrarian style investor or even a small cap fund manager, then what you've seen is basically underperformance because of this crowdedness. So people have been piling into names such as Ping An, such as Kuicha Maotai, which is a Baidu company. So high growth, low vol names, you can understand their appeal. Global portfolios, don't forget, is still underweight Asian equities, especially Chinese equities. So when you look at the names outside of those favored names, you're actually seeing some interesting fundamentals, an income stream or focus, especially from the state-owned enterprises, highly influenced by improving corporate governance from a regulatory perspective, and they're trading at very, very cheap multiples, again, because they've just been overlooked by the market.
So what about Hong Kong stocks? Because obviously they are affected very specifically by what's happening. We also saw Cathay Pacific's results a little bit earlier, which were very much on the downside. How do you see that working at the moment?
So the main constituents, or the largest constituents of the Hong Kong market, remain Tencent, HSBC. So they aren't exactly Hong Kong-centric. It's interesting that Alibaba has now come out after delaying their secondary offering, and so that's also going to be highly anticipated and watched by the market. But in general, the bulk of the Hong Kong-listed names are indeed China plays, and also we can't underestimate the influence of the mainland Chinese investor. So through the Stock Connect program, you're still seeing relatively attractive flows, both going into the Hong Kong market and with further inclusion. So at the end of this month with MSCI, foreign investors also adding to the Asia market, and very, very importantly, the new Starboard, which is China's version of the NASDAQ.
You've been talking, Catherine, about sort of names that are perhaps underappreciated by investors, and one of your top calls for the rest of the year is China mid and small cap names. So I want to ask you about Tencent, which of course doesn't fall into that category, but we are getting the numbers today. 2018 was a bit of an annus horribilis, to say the least, for Tencent. We're expecting in the options market that we could see actually some quite big swings either way based on the earnings. Is Tencent a stock that you would find attractive, either in its own right or relative in any way to Alibaba?
There's a phrase that we use regarding Tencent these days called the Great Wall of China. And essentially the retail investors, whether you're from mainland China or Hong Kong, put these bids in. And even if you see heavy institutional selling, these bids basically create the Great Wall. Now, Tencent, a bit like Alibaba, their ecosystems are just enormous in China. So, of course, given sentiment on the ground, potentially weaker advertising, you are going to get these periods of maybe lower numbers versus previous quarters or, earnings numbers. But in general, Tencent is one of those names. It's a hold and buy. It still can deliver very attractive earnings visibility.
What about more widely in Asia, Malaysia, Thailand? What are your calls there? Where do you see things going? We've seen obviously cut rates in Thailand and concerns about those economies in the light of what's happening in China.
A lot of the ASEAN countries have in fact benefited from the shift outside of China, the diversification of manufacturing. So the economies have been doing well. So again, Thailand, Vietnam in particular, and Malaysia. The hiccup though, or the constraint is simply that these countries don't have the infrastructure or the scalability that the Chinese manufacturers have created. And so often you will see these days ports being congested or bottlenecks because they just don't have that flexibility that the Chinese do have. And also the domestic consumption story across ASEAN, beneficiaries of also the Chinese tourist, that bodes well for these markets.
What's your outlook for where the central banks go from here, with the Fed on pause and with questions over actually the fact that there are limits to monetary easing from China? Most people I speak to say, yes, we're going to see the fiscal side, but not the monetary easing. Does that mean other Asian central banks will be on pause also?
Probably pause, but highly monitoring the data. And when we look at China in particular, we still have an outstanding debt issue. So for them to throw enormous amounts of stimulus back into the economy, i.e. like what we saw during the global financial crisis, is a bit of a red flag because it's tweaking around the edges. It's really trying to underpin that consumption story and see the revival of the capex cycle.
And what about PBOC and yuan fixing? What happens there?
It's likely to be quite range-bound in terms of the currency. Don't forget the Chinese government's still very mindful about capital outflows. So they don't want to see their currency, as a result, increased capital outflows for that reason.
Catherine Young, Investment Director at Fidelity. Really great to have you with us in the London studio. Thank you so much for joining. And we were touching on Tencent there. Of course, we are still awaiting the third quarter results from Tencent. And whenever they do drop on the Bloomberg, there is a wonderful TLIV blog set up so that you can follow all the action on that. I mean, the options markets are sort of pricing for a move of 2.9% either way on the results, which would be the biggest post-earnings move in 15 months. So they're obviously bracing potentially for some volatility in the options markets. Elsewhere in European markets, we're almost an hour into the equity market open, Roger, and it is a down day, a bit of risk off, which is reflected in the Stock 600 down 0.4%, US futures lower, and the 10-year yield sliding too.
And coming up on Daybreak Europe, Anna Edwards and Caroline Hepker are back, and they'll be speaking to Peter Toogood, CIO at Embark Group. That's coming up here on Daybreak Europe. This is Bloomberg.
Whatever job you're searching for, you can find it on LinkedIn. First jobs, flexible jobs, work from home on a Friday jobs, advertising jobs, accounting jobs, HR, PR, even ER jobs, Soho jobs, Shoreditch jobs. Keep me away from the central line jobs. Banking jobs, building jobs, never ever boring jobs. Small jobs, big jobs, lunch in Borough Market jobs, or even voiceover jobs, which is how I ended up recording this ad. Search millions of jobs on LinkedIn and find one meant for you.
'Tis the season to be hunched over your laptop. Not on our watch. In real life, you can fill your senses and your baskets. Feel all the sights, sounds, lols, and OMGs. Wear laughing emojis on actual smiley faces. Battery is running low. Take the kids to Santa's Grotto. In real life, you can find just the right present using the most advanced search engine in the world. Your eyes. We can't in real life. Brent Cross, London. Free parking for all sleighs and cars.
I've always loved a kitchen experiment, especially smoothies. I've blended all sorts of mad combinations. Strawberry and charcoal, broccoli and chocolate. Not my best, that. But when I test blenders in the Witch Lab, it's not about flavour, it's about performance. Our tests use proper tough stuff, hard ice, strong veg, rough nuts. And the blenders that can hack it are the only ones we recommend for your kitchen.
Which tests harder so you can buy smarter.
Visit which.co.uk.
Digital capital of the world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and at TikTok on Twitter. This is Bloomberg Radio.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
External pressure is going to be an opportunity for reform in China. I think liquidity more generally across financial markets is an issue and a concern.
The Spanish banks in particular are in a much better place than they were 5 years ago.
It wouldn't be great to have a drawn-out trade conflict with the US or indeed with anybody else.
I've never been one to prophesy where sterling will be, and you're a madman if you think you can.
Bloomberg Daybreak Europe on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning from London. I'm Anna Edwards.
And I'm Caroline Hepke. You're listening to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe live on London DAB Digital Radio.
We've had a lot of debates on TV this morning, Caroline, as to whether the comments from President Trump really changed the narrative on trade, or whether he was just saying the same stuff we've heard before. You know, he said a deal could come soon, but at the same time, he said tariffs could go higher. So some people saying it matters and some people saying, no, we've heard that all before.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing driving the markets, of course, is another day of escalating anti-government protests in Hong Kong. That has seen a significant hit for the Hang Seng, the MSCI Hong Kong index, and obviously, you know, mounting concern.
Yeah, absolutely. So the longer we see this tension and this disruption on the streets of Hong Kong, I guess investors increasingly asking themselves whether this is some kind of new normal that we need to adjust to and price for on Hong Kong assets. Let's get to a data check then, and I'll start in Asia, as we've been mentioning what's been going on in Hong Kong. The MSCI Asia Pacific down 0.8%, and the Hong Kong market, the Hang Seng, down by 1.8%. So it seemed as if markets were relaxed about things yesterday, but once again, nervous today. Into the European session, then we pick up on a couple of those themes in Europe, and we've got the Stock 600 down by 0.5%, the FTSE 100 down by a similar margin, the CAC 40 down 0.4%, and the ZDAX down 0.6. Interesting to mention the Spanish markets, because Spanish banks under pressure after we've seen the coalition government that's been put together in Spain, perhaps not seen as terribly bank or market friendly, and the IBEX down by 1% as a result. Banks in particular in focus there. Just checking a couple of other assets for you. US futures also point lower by 0.3 percentage point right now. Oil prices weaker, down 0.6% at 56.44 on WTI. Yields on the US 10-year 1.9%. So that is a little bit weaker. So some money going into bond markets, as you might expect on a day of stock selling. And the dollar is fairly flat to positive. No big moves this morning on the pound, although some of the latest YouGov poll does suggest an increasing lead for the Conservatives and a fall away in support for the Brexit Party, but that is just one of many polls available.
Yeah, indeed, and not very predictable, the UK electorate, certainly at the moment, hasn't been in previous elections recently either. Right, let's talk about the stock markets this morning. Global stocks have dipped. US President Donald Trump saying that the US will increase tariffs on China if the first step of a broader agreement is not reached. He was speaking yesterday at the Economic Club of New York. He said that Beijing wants a deal to happen.
It's going to 15% very soon. And I tell this to Larry, I tell it to everybody. If we don't make a deal, we're going to substantially raise those tariffs. They're going to be raised very substantially. And that's going to be true for other countries that mistreat us too, because we've been mistreated by so many countries.
So for more on this, let's bring in Peter Toogood, CIO at Embark Group. Very good morning to you, Peter. What does this all mean for the markets? Anna was mentioning the debate that we've been having really across Bloomberg television and radio about just how important the comments were for Mr. Trump, whether it was sort of 2020 electioneering or whether we learnt anything new about the trade war.
No, we didn't. Anna and I were discussing earlier. Trump needs needs an economic war with someone. He can't have a real war, so he's having an economic one, and China's the most obvious target here. By the way, threatening the Chinese generally doesn't work well, so it's quite interesting he's bothered to do it again. If you think about China's perspective, they just increased their surplus last month against the US yet again.
Yes.
So for all the hurrahing about how the trade tariffs are working so well, it's continuing to extend its surplus against America.
So, and you don't think that the trade tensions really matter all that much to markets? I mean, when you look at the rally we've seen in stocks in recent months, Peter, do you put that down to expectations of a phase one trade deal, or you just say, no, it's not to do with trade, actually?
No, I put it down to 250 billion put in there by the Federal Reserve starting in August. QE by any other name, because the interbank market started flailing around And let's be honest, that happened in 07, didn't it? And happened in 99, so we're a petit vu. Everyone else also seems to miss the CLO market is managing to plunge as well at the same time. And that's got the same clogging going on. So if I think about the mechanics of it, under the collateralized loan obligations, otherwise known as the next nightmare, I suspect, it's because that's full of private equity companies that have levered and bought stuff. And as you can see from certain levered companies, not always a good idea either. So the reality is that the trade deal, I'm not saying it isn't relevant, but I would argue that the optimism is eternally priced into this. You can keep this game going. If he did ever get a resolution before the election, it's not part of the America First policy.
It's funny, though, because I really enjoy our conversations, Peter. It's like a mental workout. Every morning we speak to each other, testing my understanding of markets, and I learn so much. But at the same time, I do remember you often being this gloomy, and yet markets through all of that have rallied.
Oh, no. I've been a very big fan of bonds, and that's been very right. I've been extremely selective. The problem with being somebody who comes on this show and others to talk about what I talk about, this time last year, I wrote a note saying in December last year, you've got a very good opportunity to buy, okay? But you've got to be opportunistic. These are trading markets here. We all look at the US as the pinch point, but let's just remember, we've only just gone past the January 18 high. So if I've been coming on here for nearly 2 years, I've been nearly 2 years right, okay? If I look at the Hang Seng, the Topics, the DAX, I can keep going. They're nowhere near where they were even 5 years ago. So we look in chunks of time. Fact is, you've made very little progress in an awful lot of stock markets by name, not necessarily by market cap. And even the much vaunted US, Russell is still below where it was in January 18. So we'd be talking as though we're up 40%.
Yeah. You can't talk about this year.
We're 2 months away from 2 years of going virtually nowhere.
Yeah, you can't talk about this year on its own, can you? And yet I do, others do, lots of people do. You've got to think about what happened the previous year.
Absolutely. We're talking about January 18 highs that we're touching around now. Yeah. So I don't wish to suggest our lives have been a waste of time for the last 2 years.
please don't.
But the fact of the matter is, it's often presented as, isn't it a marvellous bull market?
Yeah.
The Chinese stock market is still 30% where it was in 2015.
Yeah. I mean, then there's a lot of references to sort of grinding higher, to the wall of worry that
or the wall of money, which I think it probably is. I mean, the world of our world is that fully invested bears. If you look at the professionals in this world, they have known that 22 trillion has been printed to buy the bond market. If you've been a European bond market investor, you simply have had to lay on a beach and watch the ECB buy what is now 35% of the European bond market is owned by the ECB. Can I get this right? They're nationalising the sovereign bond market. The Japanese are way ahead. They're at 60%. Just think about what I just said.
Yeah,
a central bank owns 35% of the sovereign European bond market.
And if they're going to keep on buying, we may as well do more fiscal spending, I suppose, which is another big theme.
Which is another reason why bonds have probably reached their nadir. And I suspect it's the summer of this year, because you're now going to have this idea that you can just borrow long and everything is fine. Psychologically, mentally, and I have been a bond bull for 8 years, you know that. I definitely am not a bond bull now. Because if you look at
why is that, though? It's just too much?
Well, because at the end of the day, every central bank in the world is saying, we have arrived.
Yeah.
Over to you. If you're the ECB, what was it waffling on someone this morning about tiering as if it's going to make a credit cycle in Germany? Forget it. The only thing that can change this is fiscal spending from here. Okay?
Yeah. And Christine Lagarde next week obviously will be crucial, because she didn't really say much in her first speech, but I know all the eyes are on the second speech about whether she'll actually now sort of reveal a little bit more about her thinking. But your conviction trade, though, is on silver and gold,
because I think you'll get to a crisis. Because to get that Green Deal, which is what it's going to be, this fiscal thing will be a Green Deal and an infrastructure deal. Nice contradiction there. You've got to build roads and do a Green Deal at the same time. Slightly contradictory. But let's say we do get there. To get there, you'll need the crisis, because the trigger for someone like Lagarde, she's no central banker, has to be a crisis so big the Germans, the Dutch and the savers of Europe are forced into a situation. I'm not saying this is going to happen, by the way, but the logic is that you move in that direction. One of the biggest investors in green technology is the Chinese, which everyone manages to forget. They've got so many solar panel companies it's coming out of their ears. So, I mean, if you want to go long with the New Deal, you have to start looking back at China.
Is there some sort of pensions crisis drives us in that direction?
Well, actually, why don't we have 4% bond yields? You'd solve all the pension problems overnight. If you had 4% bond yields in the UK, every pension fund will be liquid. The only reason they're all illiquid and massively having companies pouring. Here's a contradiction for you. Bond yields go up. Let's not decide how we get there. Bad or good reason for bond yields to go up. Every pension fund in the UK is liquid again.
Yeah.
I mean, it's no one ever talks about the upside of high bonds.
Well, I mean, is there a sort of Goldilocks point then where we get a bit higher yields and so pensions do okay, and we also have built some infrastructure in the meantime, so the economy is more sustainable, but yields haven't gone too high as to blow out borrowing costs for European governments?
Sponsored by Boris Johnson.
Don't say that. Questioning my integrity as a journalist.
No, how dare I?
How dare you?
Well, the option is Corbyn, and even I'm going to be biased here. No way. So it is absolutely, emphatically, the market wants to go to Goldilocks, but let's actually think about it now. The US, there was a target miss again in inflation in the US. I mean, it's missing, okay? Number two, the labour force is fully employed. No, there's a skill shortage. Labour force is not fully employed. The participation rate in the US is the second lowest in 40 years, okay? There's lots of people who want work but can't get it. In this country, I believe it's the same. The gig economy plus a lot of people over 50 are underemployed. I don't think there is. What I think there is a skill shortage in certain areas. So you'll see a lot of rotation in that area, and there's a shortage in the millennial age range because they are moving around at the highest rate since 08.
There's a lot of talk about skills shortage in the election campaign. How do we always get back to politics?
Yeah, indeed. Fantastic stuff. Always a great conversation. Peter Toogood, CIO at Embark.
My pleasure. Happy days.
Yeah, it was very, very good to speak to you on Bloomberg Television and Bloomberg Radio this morning. We are, of course, only 3 weeks away from the election here in the UK. A lot of talk about spending pledges for the NHS and more. But yeah, there'll be more on that 12 noon on our Bloomberg Westminster UK Politics programme if you want to tune into that. In the meantime, shall we get you some global news? Here's Bloomberg's Leanne Gerrans. Good morning.
Good morning, Caroline. Hong Kong's security chief is warning of unthinkable consequences if violence continues in the city as the financial centre braces for more protests. Bloomberg's Karen Lee has all those details.
The city's number 2 official, Chief Secretary Matthew Chung, also said the government remains confident in its ability to contain the chaos after days of intense unrest in the Asian financial hub. The two men spoke after a night of pitched battles across the city between demonstrators and police, including at a university campus, and after further disruptions to a packed morning commute. In Hong Kong, Karen Lee, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
Meanwhile, a key development this morning, Hong Kong is suspending all public school classes tomorrow as protesters rage. Crossing over to Europe, Spain might have a government faster than many expected. Acting Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez on Tuesday signed an agreement to form a coalition government with the anti-establishment party Podemos. Sanchez and the Podemos leader still need the support of the other parties to form a left-wing government. Lebanese President Michel Aoun has sparked public anger by calling on demonstrators to just give up and go home. His comments sparked a new surge of unrest which claimed the first death. Demonstrators reacted by blocking roads and setting fires across the country, restating demands for the removal of corrupt leaders. And finally, as spoken about at the top of the show, Labour is promising to spend more on the NHS in England than the Tories if it wins the general election. The NHS budget would rise by £155 billion by 2023. That's in order to cut waiting times and boost mental health services. Yesterday, Torsten Bell, CEO of the Resolution Foundation, told Bloomberg Westminster that the election is now at a tipping point.
It's the point at which Britain moves from a political and economic world where we're worrying about how much and how to cut public spending after the financial crisis to a row about how and how much to increase it in the years ahead.
Meanwhile, the Tories have hit out at Labour's spending, saying its plans for a shorter working week would eat into NHS funding, which is due to needing more staff. Global News 24 hours a day, on air and at TikTok, on Twitter, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg Anna.
Thanks very much for that, Leanne. Here's a look at some of the things you should be watching out for today. 9:30 GMT, we will get another take on the UK economy with data likely to show that inflation decelerated to 1.5% in October. Bloomberg Economics suggests CPI is likely to remain below target over the course of next year. Half an hour later, it's Euro area industrial production. Have we been in a manufacturing recession? Do you see any brighter spots ahead following that? Later today, of course, Fed Chair Jerome Powell addresses Congress in Washington.
And still ahead on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, Jamie Dimon is wrong when he says negative rates have been harmful to European growth. So argues Bloomberg Opinion's Ferdinando Giuliani. We'll be having him on here, Bloomberg Radio, to discuss that point about negative interest rates. This is Bloomberg.
Hey y'all, Jeff Foxworthy here. Now, if you've ever found yourself repeating the same thing over and over for 75 years, you might be Smokey Bear.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
That's why I'm filling in for Smokey to switch things up, because there's a lot more to say. And I should know because my grandfather was a firefighter. And one of the things he taught me is that the people that love the outdoors the most are often the ones accidentally starting wildfires, which means always BYOB. No, bring your own bucket to the campfire. And be extra careful with things like burning yard trimmings. Don't just walk away, or chances are you might be starting a wildfire. So for the love of the outdoors, go to SmokeyBear.com to learn more about wildfire prevention. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
In today's volatile markets, investors need resilient portfolios to help handle the pressure. Through decades of expansions and recessions and changing interest rates, clients have turned to PIMCO to help them stay on course, no matter what course markets take. PIMCO, active fixed income solutions that aim to give investors an edge. All investments contain risk and may lose value. Investing in the bond market is subject to risks. Consult your investment professional prior to making an investment decision.
Listen, as a hiring manager, I've got to tell you, the best job candidate isn't always the typical candidate. Sometimes they're a grad of life.
Meet the grads of life. Young adults of unique determination and experience. An ideal fit for your company in an entry-level position, internship, or mentorship. They might not have every qualification you typically look for, but they're exactly who your company needs.
Sometimes the best candidates aren't the ones you're used to.
Go to gradsoflife.org to learn how to find, cultivate, and train this great pool of untapped talent. Brought to you by the Ad Council and gradsoflife.org.
Influential conversations from Bloomberg Television. Here's Tracy Alloway.
Let's bring in Jonathan Kavanaugh. He is JP Morgan Chase's head of Asia EMFX strategy. Given some of the concerns that we've seen in the market, concerns over the phase one trade agreement, concerns over the situation in Hong Kong, what's your pick for a safe haven in the currency space?
I think that people have been generally surprised this year about the extent to which the dollar yen has been fairly resilient. So we haven't seen as much, I guess, yen strength as you might expect given the global headwinds from the economic slowdown, etc., and all of the risk events that we've kind of seen transpire. So I think that kind of reflects to some extent that we're still seeing a fairly strong domestic outflow story from Japan to the rest of the world. And if you listen to what our Japanese strategists are saying, they do expect that continue. So we're not expecting, even over the next kind of 6 to 12 months, much yen strength to come through. So that largely leaves things like the dollar, the Swiss francs, as you kind of mentioned, as probably more of the true safe havens. I think particularly from the dollar against emerging market currencies, I still think the dollar is still going to be the safest play that people view in terms of where they're going to be putting their money if they become concerned about the economic cycle, if they become concerned about the US-China trade conflict as well.
Hear more interviews like this one on Bloomberg Television, streaming live on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg mobile app, or check your local cable listings.
Markets, headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app and at TikTok on Twitter. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg's European headquarters here in London, I'm Caroline Hepker with this Bloomberg Radio Business Flash. So investors are weighing the likelihood of a partial US-China trade deal after President Donald Trump spoke at the Economic Club of New York. He did say that he was basically promising more tariffs if there was not a phase one trade deal actually done. That has really brought in a slightly negative tone to the markets, along with, of course, the continued civil unrest in Hong Kong. These anti-government protests are continuing to get quite serious, a third day of intensifying protests, and that means that the Hang Seng slumped down 1.8% this morning. The MSCI Hong Kong index down 2.4%. Here in Europe, we are down 0.6% on the Euro Stoxx 600. The FTSE 100 also down 0.5%. The Xetra DAX drops 0.9%. One of the big news stories was ABN AMRO. Their results, quite disappointing earnings. The shares down currently 4.4%. A quote mixed third quarter, and we do have the ongoing money laundering investigation, so that's raising concerns around the company's cost-cutting targets. In terms of where we see the US market open, we're down 0.3% on S&P 500 futures right now. In the bond markets this morning, ahead of Jerome Powell addressing Congress later today, 1.9% for benchmark US yields, down actually 3.5 basis points at the moment, and German yields negative 27 basis points, also down 2.5 basis points right now, as we had that energy outlook from the International Energy Agency looking at peak oil 2030. WTI, Brent crude both dropped this morning. Brent crude down 1 full percentage point at $61.43. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Leanne Gerrans with more of what's going on around the world. Good morning.
Good morning, Caroline. Americans get their first look at witness testimony against President Trump today. The House Intelligence Committee begins public hearings in the impeachment inquiry. First up is the top U.S. diplomat in Ukraine, William Taylor. He has told lawmakers the administration withheld aid to Ukraine over political investigations. Large parts of Venice are flooded after being hit by the city's highest tide in more than 50 years. It peaked at more than 6 foot last night, forcing many visitors to use temporary platforms above the water. The mayor of the popular tourist destination says he will declare a state of disaster and is warning of severe damage. And finally, global greenhouse gas pollution rose for a second year. That's in a row. That ended a lull in emissions. And according to the International Energy Agency, that puts the world on track for further increases through 2040. The IEA says the solution is for governments to take radical action. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and at TikTok, on Twitter, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg Opinion, informed perspectives, and expert data-driven commentary on breaking news.
It is 9:20 in the city. Time to check in with Bloomberg Opinion. We're joined today by opinion columnist Ferdinando Giuliano, who's been writing about negative rates. Good morning to you, Ferdinando. And in fact, you write that Jamie Dimon, who doesn't like negative rates, you say he's wrong about negative rates. We were having a really interesting conversation with one of our guests a little bit earlier on, who said you can't drive a credit cycle in an area with so many savers through negative rates. Is that a criticism you accept or no?
Well, I mean, first of all, let's say that, obviously Jamie Dimon is one of a number of Wall Street executives who've been vocal against negative rates. The heads of Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley have also shared his concerns. Now, I mean, I think there is as it were, a philosophical objection, which is, it seems rather bizarre, this idea that savers should pay, when we always rewarded saving. But, in a world where fundamentals are driving us to an abundance of savings, the only thing I think, central banks have been left with very little option but to enforce this policy. And so long as you don't have major financial stability consequences, I think this is an okay policy. It's a new tool, but the world we live in is a new world.
Ferdinando, why is this happening now, do you think? Obviously, it's a decade that we've had some of these policies in place in terms of QE. Is it the changeover at the ECB? Is it bank earnings? What is it that you think is prompting this view to be sort of so publicly aired now?
I mean, I think, the low for long, or even now negative for long idea is starting to hurt banks. For a while, remember, central banks such as the ECB had presented this as some sort of emergency tool which would go away rather quickly. But now we are all getting near to, a decade of negative rates in some parts of Europe. And banks are squeezed. They're squeezed for a number of reasons. Some of them have to do with central banks. Obviously low rates make credit spreads very tight, and it's hard for them to make money. But there are other reasons: technology, the competition from fintech, regulation, some would argue. So, the fact that there seems to be no end in sight for this policy is making them vocal.
What do we know? So, and also we're some years into it, as Caroline says, Ferdinando. So, what do we know about the way that it does work on communities that do save a lot, or on corporates that have cash saved? I mean, does it, if you do punish savers, does it make them go out and borrow more? Does it make them go out and spend more, or does it just make them save more?
Well, it's interesting. So we have a fair amount of research now. And for example, there is, this very good working paper by the European Central Bank, which shows that actually, first of all, deposits have been going up since negative interest rates were introduced. So, this idea that people would go and take their money out of the bank because they don't want to be charged seems to be wrong, at least in Europe. And very interestingly, the banks which actually pass through these negative rates to consumers, because remember, some banks don't, they just take a hit on profits, they seem to be spurring lending, because actually corporations, which are actually the ones which are mainly penalized by these negative rates, small retail savers have been exempted so far, go and lend more money. This is the evidence. Now, obviously, there's other evidence, other papers, including one by Larry Summers and a co-author, who show that the more you cut into negative territory, the less effective this policy becomes. But this is true of a number of other tools, including asset purchases. I mean, it's something which is rather well established, that the more you go into this unconventional monetary policy, the less effective it becomes. What we don't see is them actually being damaging, which is the accusation which is levied by these Wall Street titans.
Okay, thanks very much for joining us, opinion columnist Ferdinando Giuliano. Really fascinating conversation, no doubt one that will run and run, Caroline, around negative rates. Bloomberg opinion columnist Ferdinando Giuliano. You can read more on this and other stories by going to Bloomberg Opinion at bloomberg.com/opinion or on the terminal OPIN Go.
And straight ahead on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, Hong Kong shutters schools as protests smash the Hang Seng again. We're going to cross over to the city next live to talk about the ongoing violence. This is Bloomberg.
With the Bloomberg Business of Sports Report, I'm Michael Barr. A pair of lawyers, after success in fighting the jock taxes charged to athletes in Tennessee and Ohio, are eyeing Pittsburgh. Jock taxes are the various state income taxes levied on professional athletes for games they play outside their home state. Players from the NFL, NHL, and MLB are suing Pittsburgh for what they claim is an illegally high tax on non-resident athletes who play in the city. A group of former soccer players, including ex-Chelsea player and TV pundit Andy Townsend, sued St. James's Place Wealth Management for advising them to make investments in British films that were later deemed tax avoidance vehicles by UK authorities. The case in London is being brought by 14 investors. CBS executives said all UEFA Championship League matches will be on CBS All Access, and select games will air on the broadcast network. And that is a Bloomberg Business of Sports Report. I'm Michael Barr. In-depth analysis, concise reporting, need-to-know global business news. Around the world and across the markets, Bloomberg connects the dots for decision makers. Stay on top of today's headlines. Follow big breakthroughs in tech. Understand the latest political issues. See how the world's wealthiest are spending their money. Track what's happening in the markets, and much more. Subscribe today to Bloomberg, the global standard for business reporting. Get it all at Bloomberg.com/subscriptions.
Are you one of those people who thinks it's okay to drive stoned? I mean, what's the worst that can happen? You end up driving below the speed limit? It's no big deal, right? Wrong. The truth is, your reaction times slow way down when you're high. You not only put yourself in danger, but everyone around you. Talk about a buzzkill. Stop kidding yourself. It's not okay to drive high. If you've been using marijuana in any form, do not get behind the wheel. If you feel different, you drive different. Drive high, get a DUI. Paid for by NHTSA.
'Tis the season to be hunched over your laptop. Not on our watch. In real life, you can feel your senses and your baskets. Feel all the sights, sounds, lols, and OMGs. Wear laughing emojis on actual smiley faces. Battery's running low. Take the kids to Santa's Grotto. In real life, you can find just the right present using the most advanced search engine in the world. Your eyes. We hunt in real life. Brent Cross, London. Free parking for all sleighs and cars.
For the independent bookseller who found you that first edition. For the baker who brings the smell of freshly baked bread to your door.
And for the barista who never needs to ask your name.
We've all got a part to play.
Every little tap keeps your high street alive.
And helps your communities thrive.
So if you love where you live, shop small.
Shopping on your local high street can make a big difference. Shop small. Only by American Express.
The world is a noisy place. But whether I'm here or here, my phone calls are always loud and clear on my Doro 6620. Hi, love. Yes, I can hear you perfectly. I'm 10 minutes away. Get your Doro 6620 from Amazon, Tesco and O2 today.
If you're planning on driving this weekend, expect delays on the A406 North Circular Road. There'll be road closures between Edmonton and Tottenham from 10 p.m. on Friday the 15th of November to 5 a.m. on Monday the 18th of November, while we carry out essential maintenance and repairs. All roads in the surrounding area will be extremely busy, so please allow more time for your journey and expect delays in the area. Plan ahead and check alternative routes at tfl.gov.uk. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters.
3 is a magic number. 300 schemes to help bugs and bees, supporting environmental needs. 8,000 grants for local sports, and performing arts get our support. 7 millionaires every week, the nation's on a winning streak. 30 million pounds to good causes every week. Who'd have thought it? These are magic numbers.
Your numbers make amazing happen. 25 years of the National Lottery.
Rules and procedures apply. Players must be 16 or over. Hacksaw, jigsaw or mitre saw? I'm just not sure.
Sharpening up for a big project? Head to the B&Q Tool Shop. Get hands-on in-store with our wide range of saws and grinders, including the Black & Decker Scorpion-powered handsaw for just £40. The B&Q Tool Shop. You can do it when you B&Q it.
Broadcasting live to London on DAB digital radio, to New York, Bloomberg 1130, to Washington DC, Bloomberg 99.1, to Boston, Bloomberg 106.1, to San Francisco, Bloomberg 960, and around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
9:30 a.m. here in London, 10:30 a.m. in Berlin and across Europe. Good morning, I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Anna Edwards. You're listening to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Let's just get to some breaking news. We've got UK data out this morning, and we see UK October inflation rate that falls to 1.5%. The forecast was for a move to 1.6%. So it has fallen as was anticipated, perhaps a touch more than had been expected. Interesting to see this level of inflation, because at the time where we saw inflation going to its highest, I think it was November 2017, we saw it way above the 3.5% level. Of course, the target for the Bank of England is 2%, so it has successfully come back down as sterling has recovered a little bit from its 2016-2017 lows. So that's the inflation story coming out of the UK right now, hitting a 3-year low as energy prices take effect. Energy price caps take effect, and that is also part of the story. Cheaper gas and electricity pushing UK inflation to its lowest rate in almost 3 years during last month. A little bit of respite perhaps for Boris Johnson after 2 days of disappointing data in terms of wages and growth. Sure, the UK avoided a recession, but still growth was sluggish in the last quarter. Let's get to the data then. We check that every 15 minutes here on Bloomberg Radio. We've got the stock 600 in Europe down by 0.7%, and the Spanish story really moving things around now here in Europe. So the FTSE 100 also down 0.5%. The CAC 0.6% weaker. The Xetra DAX 0.9% weaker. So we've got a general deterioration in sentiment for European equities. Part of that is what Trump said yesterday about tariffs, but a lot of debate about whether any of that was really new. That was President Trump at the Economic Club of New York, of course. A lot of talk about what's going on in Hong Kong. That left the Hang Seng weaker by 1.8%. But add to that the coalition building in Spain, which has seen a deal with Podemos, and that as a result is weighing on the banking sector in Spain. And so the Spanish IBEX is down by 1.4% this hour. Just checking a couple of other assets, a little bit weaker on oil prices, 56.34. That's WTI for you. The yield on the US 10-year substantially lower, 1.89% as money goes into government bonds. The dollar is fairly flat, actually. The dollar index at 98.33, fairly flat. Not much move in sterling, despite changes in the polls. 128 is where we trade.
So let's talk about one of the big stories that is moving markets. A warning today from Hong Kong officials and Chinese state media. They both say that there will be consequences if violence in the city continues. Protests disrupted traffic across the city for a third day today, and for the first time, the government is closing public schools. So let's go live now to Hong Kong, where our senior editor Jodie Schneider joins us. Look, what is happening in Hong Kong today? Why has there been this escalation over the last 3 days? There have been a number of incidents. What's different this week?
Well, the clashes have intensified in the past few days and have disrupted the heart of the city's financial center during weekdays. That's a shift from the mostly weekend protests that have occurred throughout the city over the past 5 months. And today, that was the same. We saw continued clashes. It disrupted traffic across the city. Rail and bus lines were halted. Schools and universities suspended classes. And for the first time, the government did announce it would close public schools tomorrow. And things started escalating last weekend after a student died of injuries sustained near a protest last week.
And so that's the latest that we're seeing on the ground. What kind of messaging are we getting from Hong Kong officials then, Jodie? Because we hear from Carrie Lam fairly regularly. We also hear from the Hong Kong police.
Yes, we've Chief Executive Carrie Lam, who's been given fresh support from Communist Party leaders in Beijing, continues to vow not to give in to violent demonstrations. Hong Kong officials and Chinese state media are warning of consequences if the violence continues. And we saw in the past day state-owned outlets, including the Global Times and People's Daily, containing harshly worded commentaries, condemning politicians and even teachers for emboldening the demonstrations. The Global Times repeated an earlier warning that Beijing could intervene militarily if the violence continues. We also heard from other officials in Beijing, including the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman, who said that the protest violence has pushed Hong Kong into an extremely dangerous situation and reiterated Beijing's support for the city's police force.
Okay, so concern then for people in Hong Kong, but also for Hong Kong as a financial hub. Obviously, we've seen shares this morning slump, the Hang Seng down 1.8%, for example, and that's a trend, that continues. So there is worry really about Hong Kong as a financial hub. Is that how you would assess it?
Well, I think there's growing concerns. Obviously, there's been 5 months of protests, and this has been a question. But this slump in equities is really as a result of the protests gripping the city with this escalation. I think that's the real concern, that it's escalating and that it's spread to the heart of the financial district, which had been pretty much spared. This was a weekend kind of event, and now we're seeing it at the heart of the financial center. Today there were calls for another noon rally, and there were protesters in the financial center vandalizing things. So I think this is a growing concern about how does this end? When will this end?
Jodie, thank you very much. Yeah, growing concern there, and increasingly investors asking themselves then whether this is some kind of new normal or whether we do move on from this. Thank you very much, Hong Kong Senior Editor Jodie Schneider.
Now, let's get all the latest in global news. Here's Bloomberg's Leanne Gold. Good morning.
Good morning, Caroline. Starting in Europe, Spain might have a government faster than many expected. Acting Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez on Tuesday signed an agreement to form a coalition government with the anti-establishment party Podemos. Bloomberg's Jeanette Newman reports.
The potential breakthrough came only 2 days after Spain held general elections. Spaniards had elected a very divided parliament, so many were expecting drawn-out talks to form a government. The announcement also caught investors by surprise. Investors are wary of some of the economic policies espoused by Podemos. Sanchez and Podemos leader Pablo Iglesias still need the support of other parties to form a left-wing government. It looks likely that they will succeed. In Madrid, this is Jeanette Newman for Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
Lebanese President Michel Aoun has sparked public anger by calling on demonstrators to just give up and go home. His comments sparked a new surge of unrest, which claimed the first death. Demonstrators reacted by blocking roads and setting fires across the country, restating demands for the removal of corrupt leaders. Turkey is looking to turn the page of a period of strife with the US as President Erdogan prepares to meet Donald Trump. That's in D.C. later today. Bloomberg's Simon Demakan has more.
Turkey's relationship with the US has been strained by a series of rows, from disagreements over the Turkish offensive in Syria to Ankara''s decision to purchase the advanced S-400 missile system. The S-400 issue will top the agenda. President Erdogan has insisted the Russian system will be activated soon, defying calls from Washington to hold off. In Istanbul, Simon Demakan, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
And in Australia, Sydney has gotten a reprieve from bushfires that have threatened in the country's largest city. The threat level has been dropped 3 notches to very high. Meanwhile, firefighters are still battling more than 70 blazes along Australia's eastern seaboard. Global News 24 hours a day, on air and at TikTok, on Twitter, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg Anna.
Thanks very much. We've got some breaking news, haven't we, Caroline, coming through on Tencent.
Yeah, third quarter net income, 20.38 billion yuan. So that is below the estimated 23.53 billion yuan. So basically third quarter missing the lowest analyst estimate in terms of revenue, 97.24 billion yuan. Again, a miss there on revenue. The Chinese social media giant, it's been struggling with the NBA backlash. Desktop gaming is still big. They reach 1 billion people. So the advertising business, should be bigger, but, it's only small at the moment. But basically, they've missed when it comes to net income for the third quarter.
This is a company that's yet to really recover from last year's regulatory clampdown on its gaming business. That wiped out as much as $271 billion of shareholder value. Interesting to see that the options market was suggesting that traders were really positioned for a sizable move on the back of these numbers. So we'll look to tomorrow's trading in China to get a gauge of that, but perhaps as much as 3% was what the options market was factoring in. And let's get an update then on the European sports news. For that, we go to George Alderman.
Everton midfielder Fabian Delph has withdrawn from England's squad for their upcoming Euro 2020 qualifiers with Montenegro and Kosovo due to injury. A replacement won't be called up. Meanwhile, England manager Gareth Southgate is keen to find out how information is being leaked about his squad. Raheem Sterling's confrontation with Joe Gomez was reported in the media before it was officially confirmed by the FA. Ryan Jack says he's happy to play for Scotland in any position he's needed. The Rangers midfielder could end up featuring in a different role for the upcoming Euro 2020 qualifiers with Cyprus and Kazakhstan, following a number of withdrawals. Ryan Porteous, Lewis Morgan and Graham Shinney have been called up to Steve Clarke's squad. England's women have finished 2019 with an unconvincing victory. They won their friendly in the Czech Republic 3-2 last night. National team boss Phil Neville is under some pressure following their poor run of form since reaching this summer's World Cup semi-finals.
So that's the European sports roundup then. Here's a look at what you should be watching out for today at 10 a.m. So in 20 minutes time, we're going to get the latest Euro area industrial production figures. It will probably be little change in September, leaving output for the sector about 0.9% lower in the third quarter. Then later today, the Fed Chair Jerome Powell will be addressing Congress in Washington. And then this evening, the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is scheduled to meet with President Donald Trump. The rift over Istanbul purchasing Russian missile defense systems is likely to be top of the agenda there. But we have much more to come on the markets next. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
Imagine being fired because of who you love. Imagine being denied medical treatment because of who you marry. Imagine being evicted because of who you are. Millions of Americans don't have to imagine this. They have to live it. Because in 31 states, it's legal to discriminate against LGBT people. Get the facts at beyondido.org. Brought to you by the Gill Foundation and the Ad Council.
Family properties and investments have been passed to the next generation, but while the business has evolved, has your accountant stayed behind? Burden Accountants and Advisors examines the latest business trends, market conditions, and industry issues to maximize your tax advantages and meet your financial goals. Let Burden use their insight to create innovative tax solutions for your family and your business. Visit burdenllp.com to get started. BERDONLLP.com. Burden Accountants and Advisors. We listen, we solve, we do.
Asset managers who seize change to launch new strategies, add distribution channels, or exploit new technology to re-engineer the investor experience are often rewarded. However, in an industry paralyzed with complexity, few act with agility or decisively. Few run their businesses strategically, yet the most competitive managers in the market know with the right partner and a flexible operating system, you can. Go boldly toward change with SEI Investment Manager Services.
I'm Steve Meyer, president of SEI's Investment Manager Services. At SEI, we understand the emerging forces that will define success for asset managers and what firms will need to compete tomorrow. That's why we continually optimize SCI's global operating platform. If your business requires greater agility, our advanced technology, integrated best-in-class systems, and multi-asset expertise can be your catalyst for business transformation.
With SEI Investment Manager Services, you lead the charge in a competitive marketplace. Learn more at SEIC.com/C.
I've got to tell you about our beautiful city break in Bath. Midweek is the perfect time to beat the crowds. Just an hour and a half by train from London. It was so relaxing. We headed straight for Bath Christmas Market. Oh, I can still smell the roasted chestnuts and mulled wine from the chalets. Next, we donned our skates for Bath on ice. I'm a natural. Didn't have to hold on to anything or anyone. There's so much to do in Bath. I'm already planning my next trip.
Discover the magic of Bath this Christmas. Plan ahead at visitbath.co.uk/Christmas.
They don't chant your name when you give blood, or sing songs about you. But patients and their families will remember you forever. Because your blood can change their lives. We need more blood donors in Tooting, the West End and Edgware. Bleed for London. Join us today at blood.co.uk.
Think you can't afford a better car?
Well, turn that thought upside down, because in the 5 days Bristol Street Motors used car event, you can.
Get up to 5 years 0% APR finance with no deposit.
That's interest-free finance from £6,000 for 5 years, up to £30,000 for 2 years with no deposit.
There's even cash back for your trade-in.
The 0% used car event starts Friday at your local participating Bristol Street Motors dealership. T's and C's apply. Excludes online purchases. Cashback for trade-in vehicles subject to valuation and existing finance in place. Minimum spend of $2,500. 3 and 4 year terms also available. For a credit broker, not a lender, but can introduce you to a selected panel of lenders.
'Tis the season to be hunched over your laptop. Not on our watch. In real life, you can fill your senses and your baskets. Feel all the sights, sounds, lols, and OMGs. Wear laughing emojis on actual smiley faces. Battery is running low. Take the kids to Santa's Grotto. In real life, you can find just the right present using the most advanced search engine in the world. Your eyes. We hunt in real life. Brent Cross, London. Free parking for all sleighs and cars.
I've always loved a kitchen experiment, especially smoothies. I've blended all sorts of mad combinations. Strawberry and charcoal, broccoli and chocolate. Not my best, that. But when I test blenders in the Witch Lab, it's not about flavour, it's about performance. Our tests use proper tough stuff, hard ice, strong veg, rough nuts. And the blenders that can hack it are the only ones we recommend for your kitchen.
Which tests harder so you can buy smarter. Visit which.co.uk.
For the independent bookseller who found you that first edition. For the baker who brings the smell of freshly baked bread to your door.
And for the barista who never needs to ask your name.
We've all got a part to play.
Every little tap keeps your high street alive.
And helps your communities thrive.
So if you love where you live, shop small.
Shopping on your local high street can make a big difference. Shop small. Only by American Express.
This winter, why not take the short flight from London to Dublin with Aer Lingus from just $32.99 each way as part of a return trip. From coastal walks to cosy pubs and friendly locals, you'll find so much to enjoy once you're there. Smart takes a Dublin city break. Smart flies Aer Lingus. Book now at airlingus.com. Terms and conditions apply.
Imagine a hearing aid that comes with everything on your wish list.
Like great quality at a great price.
Or being discreet, so I can wear my hair up again.
And the technology to connect me to the world. My phone, even the radio.
Introducing the new Audio Nova DLI at Boots. Our lowest price, Bluetooth-enabled rechargeable hearing aid. Find out more at bootshearingcare.com and turn up the things you love. Boots. Let's feel good. Over 18s, hearing care stores only.
Markets, headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app and TikTok on Twitter. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg's European headquarters here in London, I'm Caroline Hepker with this Bloomberg Radio Business Flash. So stocks in Europe and Asia retreat. We're down 0.7% on the US stock 600 right now. The Xetra DAX down almost a full percentage point. This after we saw the MSCI Hong Kong index drop 2.4% today, and the Hang Seng declined 1.8%. As the unrest in Hong Kong continues for a third day, the intensity ramping up. HSBC, BNP Paribas encouraging employees to stay home as the violence continues. In terms of other news lines in the markets, investors really weighing the likelihood of a partial US trade deal after President Donald Trump made the comments at the Economic Club of New York, saying that he would ramp up tariffs on China if they didn't sign or agree to the phase one trade deal. Of course, we've got no timing or location for that agreement or even details about it. In terms of yields, though, and where we are in fixed income, 1.88% for benchmark 10-year Treasury yield. So we drop 5.5 basis points, and we retreat 4 basis points for French, German and UK yields. So we're negative 29 basis points for German Bund yields. The other thing to note, though, socialists in Spain could still end up in power, but it seems that politics remains stuck in Spain and in disarray after Sunday's election. So that having an impact on the IBEX, down 1.5% right now. Do watch out for US data on consumer inflation later. That will be quite key, along with Jerome Powell speaking. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Leanne Goers with more on what's going on around the world. Good morning.
Good morning, Caroline. A warning today from Hong Kong officials and Chinese state media. They both say there will be consequences if violence continues. Protesters disrupt traffic across the city for a third straight day. And for the first time, the government is closing public schools. Americans get their first look at witness testimony against President Trump today. The House Intelligence Committee begins public hearings in the impeachment inquiry. First up, the top U.S. diplomat in Ukraine, William Taylor. He has told lawmakers the administration withheld aid to Ukraine over political investigations. And finally, global greenhouse gas pollution rose for a second year. That's in a row. That ended a lull in emissions. And according to the International Energy Agency, that puts the world on track for further increases through 2040. The IEA says the solution is for governments to now take a radical action. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and at TikTok, on Twitter, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg Anna.
Leanne, thanks very much. Coming up next, our colleagues in the US are getting ready for Bloomberg Daybreak. Let's check in with Nathan Hager. Good morning to you, Nathan. We've had a lot of debates here in Europe as we see these markets dropping, and in Asia where they dropped as well. You know, US markets didn't react too negatively to what we heard from President Trump last night, but US futures point down. So you got to ask questions about what's really dragging us down here. Is it Trump's conversation around tariffs, or is it Hong Kong?
It could be a bit of both, Anna. We are certainly seeing that pullback on investor sentiment in this overnight hour. As you mentioned, we didn't see much movement during the normal trading day, but with President Trump warning of the possibility of more tariffs if he doesn't get a trade deal with China, adding to the uncertainty over the prospect for that phase one deal, along with the unrest in Hong Kong, we are certainly seeing a risk-off mood on this Wednesday morning. We will see if Fed Chairman Jerome Powell has more to say about the impact of trade wars on the economy and whether we could see some more movement on policy as we head toward the election year. Mark Vittner, senior U.S. economist at Wells Fargo, will join us to get a preview of what the Fed chairman has to say later this morning on Capitol Hill. And, of course, Powell's testimony comes as the first public impeachment hearings get underway on Capitol Hill. We'll ask Greg Valliere, chief U.S. policy strategist at AGF Investments, whether he sees the televised impeachment testimony making a market impact that we haven't much seen in terms of the closed-door sessions.
It's going to be busy stateside, isn't it? We've got the impeachment, public impeachment hearing, Powell speaking. At the same time, I think Erdogan makes a visit to the White House.
Yes, indeed.
Lots to focus on. Thank you very much, Nathan. Bloomberg Daybreak is up next. Or if you're listening on London DAB Digital Radio, you'll hear Bloomberg Surveillance.
Okay, well, let's talk a little bit more then about President Donald Trump renewing his assault on the Fed, saying that policymakers are hurting the US economy. He was speaking at the Economic Club of New York. He said that the United States is at a competitive disadvantage because the Fed has failed to follow other central banks into negative rate territory. Well, for more on this and other news, we're joined by Joyce Chang, who is Chair of Global Research at JP Morgan Securities. Very good morning to you, Joyce. Thank you for joining us. What did you pick out of that speech? A debate around whether it was market moving, should be market moving, given that we didn't get any more details around the phase one agreement between the US and China, but we did get yet more of this Federal Reserve bashing from the US president.
Well, I think the market feels that at the very least the December 15th tariff increase is not going to go ahead, and there's a very good chance that the September 1st tariff increase is removed. I don't think you're going to get more than that. I think that's what you're going to need to get a phase one deal, and I think China will require more, rolling back some of the previous tariffs to do a phase two or a phase three. But phase one seems to be something that both sides have signaled on the U.S. and the China side that they're committed to. Now, we do think that the Fed is on hold right now, but I think Trump's comments on the Fed are not going to stop.
You mentioned phase two, phase three. What is that in your mind?
Well, right now, I think the market's gotten very desensitized to all of these different announcements. But if you get phase one, that's basically just back to where we were in May. I mean, it isn't really progress at all. So phase two and three could you do something comprehensive? And I think the prospects of doing something comprehensive before the 2020 elections are actually, quite distant. That's because a lot of this involves national security issues, it involves IP issues, which are just much harder to tackle. So will you have that Trump will act, on the immediate tariffs and basically delaying them? I think that will occur, before the holiday shopping season.
Is the Trump strategy actually creating a desire to move on IP issues within China? Do you think China sees a need to move on that subject or not?
I think those are much trickier issues because they're related to national security, and I think they're much harder to address. So the issues where China has focused for phase one is purchasing more agricultural goods, which is something that they need to do. They've also talked about improving the overall framework, but the point I would make is where we're at on trade is actually still further behind than where we were in May.
I want to talk about something else in the markets away from President Donald Trump, much as the trade war obviously is fascinating, to specifically the triple B cliff on the horizon. You've written a lot about this, that there is a concern about the rise of business leverage, and we were this morning been talking a lot about, unicorns and zombie companies in this lower for longer environment. So just tell me about the concerns that you have, the risks, and also the rewards in the markets here.
Well, I think the question that you're getting as we go to negative interest rates and towards zero interest rates is the high-grade corporate credit market becoming sort of a quasi-risk-free market? Because even though you do have a buildup of the overall debt, the actual repayments profile remains very, very low, and it continues to come down. So you've got this dilemma. You've had this massive increase in the triple B bond market. I mean, it's 5 times higher. And if it does go to double B, that's a much smaller market. Can the market absorb that? But what you're seeing is that as negative yields have, sort of taken over, there's just more of a perception that at least for the high grade bond market, the investment grade market, this is becoming more risk-free just because the repayments profile keeps on coming down.
Do you have worries about corporate profitability in the US? Because obviously that links into where these corporates end up on the ratings horizon. Some people point to, there's S&P profits, and then there's other measures of profitability, reported to government, for example, which perhaps suggests that maybe profits have not been rising for US corporates in the way that S&P profits have.
Well, I think that is really the key. And when you take a look at our recession tracker, what we're concerned about, 2 years out is margin compression. The input costs, the wage costs, and the fact that labor markets are so tight, and that's really going to bring down profitability. I mean, our recession tracker still has about a 40% risk of recession over the next 12 months. That goes up over the next 2 to 3 years. And the key thing that we are focused on is whether you get basically a margin squeeze there. So that is very much at stake over the next couple of years. But over the near term, the negative interest rates have taken away a lot of the risk as far as taking immediate positioning.
Yeah, although, not in exactly the same same market, but European regulators and the central bank here have been trying to warn and caution the markets about not seeing certain bonds as being risk-free, of entirely, not relying, I suppose, on central banks. So that's a warning there.
I think there is a longer-term warning. I mean, you really have this top-down and bottoms-up disconnect right now. So at the top-down macro level, everything is looking like some of the immediate risk are off the table. Geopolitical risk are coming down as trade de-escalates, and negative interest yields are taking away the immediate profile. But bottoms up, it's not looking good with respect to profitability and the kinds of business sentiment and rebounding capex we'd want to see.
Okay, thanks very much for your time, Joyce. Great to speak to you this morning. Joyce Chang, Chair of Global Research at JP Morgan Securities.
Yeah, really good to speak to you. Now, coming up next, it's Daybreak with Nathan Hager and Karen Moscow. And if you're listening here on London DAB Digital Radio, you'll hear Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keane and Francine Lacroix. We'll leave you with a data check. We drop 0.8% on the US stock 600 right now. Also, the IBEX at 35, a big decliner, down 1.6%, as the continued protests in Hong Kong drag the MSCI Hong Kong index down 2.4%. Continued worries about 3 days of escalating violence and protests in that city.
It's really interesting to see the banking sector on the back foot. It's not just the Spanish banks, in fact. Other banks also weaker across Europe. That's it for this hour of Bloomberg Radio. This is Bloomberg.
No. If you're planning on driving this weekend, expect delays on the A406 North Circular Road. There'll be road closures between Edmonton and Tottenham from 10 p.m. on Friday the 15th of November to 5 a.m. on Monday the 18th of November, while we carry out essential maintenance and repairs. All roads in the surrounding area will be extremely busy, so please allow more time for your journey and expect delays in the area. Plan ahead and check alternative routes at tfl.gov.uk. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters.
It's one small step for man, one giant shop. Sorry, 2 giant shops a month at 10% off with the new Tesco Club Card Plus. Oh, and double data from Tesco Mobile, all for $7.99 every month.
New Tesco Club Card Plus. Value you can't stop talking about. Subscribe online today. £200 max spend per shop, in-store spend only. Club Card app required. Exclusions apply. Double data only on pay monthly. Home from home destinations. First payment payable up front, subject to status. See online for details.
Introducing a new podcast, ESPN Daily. When you want to go beyond your feed, when you want to get inside the score, when you want to get behind the highlight, there's ESPN Daily. Go deeper into the stories of the moment. Get the exclusive access and insider perspective that only ESPN can give you. ESPN Daily, hosted by me, Mina Kimes. Listen now to ESPN Daily on TuneIn.
From the financial capital of the world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and at TikTok on Twitter. This is Bloomberg Radio.
Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studios, this is Bloomberg Daybreak for Wednesday, November 13th, 2019. Coming up this hour.
Global stocks retreat as President Trump once again threatens more tariffs on China.
Violence in Hong Kong weighs on sentiment as crowds gather in the city for a third day.
Oil falls after a new forecast says peak demand could come as soon as 2030.
The public hearings in the impeachment inquiry begin today, plus Turkey's president visits the White House. I'm Michael Barr. More ahead.
I'm John Stashower in sports. Another loss for the Knicks. In Chicago, Nets blew a lead, fell in Utah. Rangers an overtime win over Pittsburgh.
That's all straight ahead on Bloomberg Daybreak. On Bloomberg 1130 New York, Bloomberg 99.1 Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 106.1 Boston, Bloomberg 960 San Francisco, Sirius XM 119, and around the world on BloombergRadio.com and via the Bloomberg Business app.
Good morning, I'm Karen Moscow.
And I'm Nathan Hager. Bloomberg Daybreak brought to you by Inovalon, a leading provider of cloud-based platforms empowering data-driven healthcare for insurance companies, physicians, pharmacy, and pharmaceutical companies. Inovalon, data has a story to tell. Inovalon gives it a voice.
And global stocks are losing ground this morning. 5:01 on Wall Street, and we check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. S&P futures are down 14 points this morning. Dow futures down 122. NASDAQ futures down 48. The DAX in Germany is down 1%. CAC in Paris down 0.6%. And the FTSE 100 is down 0.7%. Nikkei 225 in Japan dropped 0.9%. And the Hang Seng in Hong Kong fell 1.8%. 10-year Treasury of 15.30 seconds yield 1.88%. Yield on the 2-year, 1.62%. COMEX gold is up 0.9% or $12.50 at $14.6620 an ounce. The euro, 1.1017 against the dollar. The yen at 108.90. Nathan.
And Karen, we begin with the latest on U.S.-China trade talks, and President Trump is warning Beijing about the consequences of not signing a Phase 1 deal soon.
If we don't make a deal, we're going to substantially raise those tariffs. They're going to be raised very substantially.
Still, the president says China is, quote, dying to make a deal. We get more now from Bloomberg FX and rate strategist Richard Jones.
What Trump's speech did is it really firmly put the trade ball in China's court. He really upped the ante, raised the stakes, and as a result, I think it's all going to come down to how does China receive this latest rhetoric or the messaging from the president.
A location to sign a deal is still up in the air, with sources saying sites in Asia and Europe are currently under consideration.
While China listens to President Trump, it's also watching Hong Kong, where crowds gathered for a third straight day. Chinese state media is responding with harsh rhetoric. The Global Times goes so far as to warn of military intervention from Beijing, and some protesters say that's exactly what they want. Bloomberg's Stephen Angle has more from Hong Kong.
If Beijing cracks down harder, if they invoke national security provisions, and Beijing takes a hard line, some of the protesters say that will justify what they are trying to call for. That would spark what they hope is international condemnation. On the other hand, those here in Hong Kong who want a more civil society are saying this is not good because Beijing could force the cancellation of district council elections on November 24th, which could be leaning towards more pro-democracy candidates. So this is a very tenuous time, obviously, for Hong Kong's future. The protesters say this is the only way that they're going to get their demands met. Hong Kong government and Beijing are basically saying, no, this is wishful thinking.
Bloomberg's Stephen Angle reports that public schools in Hong Kong were closed today and classes have already been canceled for tomorrow. The city security chief warns of, quote, unthinkable consequences if the violence continues.
Now, the unrest in Hong Kong hit stocks in Asia again today, with the Hang Seng leading declines in the region. Bloomberg's Juliet Sally joins us from Singapore with details. Good morning, Juliet.
Good morning, Nathan and Karen. Local developers and landlords suffered the brunt of the selling in Hong Kong as nearly all stocks on the Hang Seng dropped, sending the index to a one-month low. Few clear signs of progression on the trade front added to the downbeat mood across Asia. Japanese stocks giving up Tuesday's gains and Australia's ASX 200 declining for a second session. Stocks in mainland China were little changed. Elsewhere, the Kiwi jumped the most in a year, and New Zealand bond yields surged after the RBNZ surprised the market by keeping the official cash rate on hold at 1%, defying widespread expectations of a cut. In Singapore, I'm Juliet Sally, Bloomberg Daybreak.
All right, Juliet, thank you. Back here in the U.S., traders are focused on Jerome Powell today. The Fed chairman testifies before the Joint Economic Committee of Congress at 11 a.m. Wall Street time. Here with more is Bloomberg's Michael McKee.
The Fed chairman is likely to signal once again that monetary policy is on hold, likely at least until after next year's election. Expect members of Congress to press him on the impact of trade wars, they're bad, and the possibility of more fiscal stimulus, good in a recession, but not likely. Powell speaks twice this week. He follows his testimony to the Joint Economic Committee with an appearance Thursday before the House Budget Committee. Michael McKee, Bloomberg Daybreak.
All right, Michael, thanks. Also on today's agenda, data on U.S. inflation due out at 8:30 a.m. Wall Street time. Economists predict the consumer price index gained 0.3% in October. Here with details is Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
Recent inflation data have been tepid. In September, the CPI was unchanged, the first month without an increase since January. Excluding food and energy, core CPI rose 0.1%, the smallest increase since May. Bloomberg Economics says October's data should point to rising costs for autos and apparel. Both declined in September. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Daybreak.
Vinny, thank you. Oil declining for a third day as the International Energy Agency predicts global demand will peak around 2030. It cites the use of electric cars and slowing demand from China as the main drivers. We get more from Bloomberg's Steven Stepsinski.
We have more efficient vehicles being developed that will use less gasoline. You also have the emergence of electric vehicles that will require no gasoline at all. At the same time, the IEA said that they see a cliff of Chinese demand for oil dropping. And this is significant because oil demand growth has been underpinned by China over the last 2 decades.
And checking prices now, NYMEX crude oil is down 0.9% or 48 cents at $56.32 a barrel. Brent is down 1.2%. It's at $61.34.
On the corporate front, shares of Tesla are up 0.5% in early trading. That's after Elon Musk announced the company will build a factory in Germany. The CEO says Tesla will make both batteries and cars at a new facility near Berlin.
And Tencent Holdings is out with earnings that missed estimates. Income and revenue for the company came in lower than predicted as weaker growth in China hurt its advertising business. And again, futures are lower this morning with S&P futures down almost 13 points. Dow futures down 110. Straight ahead, we have the latest world and national news. And this is Bloomberg.
All right, Karen, thanks. It's 5:07 on Wall Street. Let's bring in Michael Barr to get a check of what else is going on around the world. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Nathan. Americans will get their first look at witnesses' testimony against President Donald Trump when the House Intelligence Committee begins holding public impeachment hearings today. House Intelligence Committee Chair Adam Schiff says that he is not prepared to make any specific accusations against the president before evidence is heard.
The standard we'll have to evaluate is whether these facts show bribery, treason, high crimes, or misdemeanors. And ultimately, that's the decision we'll have to make.
Republican Representative Steve Scalise said the inquiry is taking Congress away from more important work.
They have this obsession with impeachment when the two participants in the phone call made it very clear there was no pressure, no quid pro quo, there was nothing inappropriate.
Today's hearings will start with William Taylor, the current top U.S. diplomat in Ukraine, and State Department official George Kent. Could Hillary Clinton make a third run for the White House? Clinton told the BBC she's under pressure by many to consider a 2020 run, but adds it's not in her plans at the moment. Turkey's President Erdogan sees today's meeting with President Trump as critical to patching some serious cracks dividing the NATO allies. Bloomberg's Bob Moon has a preview.
Still outraged over Turkey's invasion of northern Syria and its purchase of Russian missiles, Republican Senator John Kennedy says were it up to him, he wouldn't be inviting Erdogan to the White House.
President Erdogan, God bless him, he's going to decide on whose side he's on.
Leaving Ankara, the Turkish leader said he's determined to clear up what he called foggy weather in our relations. Kennedy wants more than that.
He's either on our side or he's on Russia's side, but he can't have it both ways.
It's notable that Erdogan has so far defied U.S. calls to hold off activating the new Russian missile system and playing both sides off each other. He told reporters he plans to talk to Vladimir Putin after meeting with Trump. Bob Moon, Bloomberg Daybreak.
A federal judge in New York has struck down an attempt by the Trump administration to undermine parts of Obamacare. The judge struck down a Department of Health and Human Services rule that allowed certain health care providers to abstain from abortions, sterilizations, and other services based on a religious or moral objection. New York, which led 19 states, and the opposition said the rule was an unlawful attempt to allow health care providers to openly discriminate and refuse necessary care. Global news 24 hours a day on air and at TikTok, on Twitter, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg, Nathan.
All right, Michael, thank you. We're coming up to 5:10 on Wall Street. Time for the Bloomberg NBC Sports Update with John Stashauer.
Nathan, as the losses mount, the seat gets hotter for Knicks coach David Fizdale. His boss, President Steve Mills, recently held an impromptu presser to say he was disappointed in the team's play. Last night's 120-102 loss to Chicago won't help Fizdale's cause to keep his job. Bulls rookie Kobe White hit 7 three-point shots just in the fourth quarter. He finished with 27 points. Marcus Morris led the Knicks with 22. Nets blew a 15-point second-half lead, lost at Utah 119-114. Kyrie Irving had 27 but missed 20 of his 30 shots. Rangers a good win at the Garden, 3-2 in overtime over Pittsburgh rookie Capo Caco, 2 goals, including the game winner. St. John's went to 3-0, 74-61 over New Hampshire. LJ Figueroa had 25 on a huge upset. Number 1 team in the nation, Kentucky, lost at home to Evansville, who came in as a 25-point underdog. Bye week for the Giants when they return Saquon Barkley out to show he's better than his performance this past Sunday against the Jets.
I do feel like myself. I mean, I would love to be going for 100 yards every game. I would love to be doing the things I was doing last year. Trust me, I don't like the fact that I was able to have 1 yard against a great team, and respect to them. But to say that I'm not healthy or this and that and third, those are just excuses. Everyone's banged up. Everyone's going through something, and I'm not going to let that be an excuse of why I'm not having a successful season.
Barkley missed games earlier with an ankle injury. Just had an X-ray on his shoulder and insisted he's fine. Close vote for American League Manager of the Year went to Minnesota's Rocco Baldelli. Aaron Boone got the same number of first-place votes, but 4 writers didn't even have Boone among the top 3. Cy Youngs go out tonight. We'll see if the Mets' Jacob deGrom wins for the 2nd straight year. With the Bloomberg NBC Sports Update, I'm John Stashower. Nathan?
All right, John, thanks. And in other sports news, Nike is breaking up with Amazon. The athletic brand will stop selling products directly through the e-commerce giant, ending a pilot program that began in 2017. Nike's overhauling its retail strategy, going after e-commerce sales without Amazon's help. Futures pointed to a lower open this morning. This is Bloomberg.
Why has J.D. Power ranked Commonwealth Financial Network #1 in independent advisor satisfaction among financial investment firms for the 6th straight time? We think it comes down to one thing: you. Because it's your input and feedback that keeps us focused on what's most important to you and your clients, and continually pushes us to be the best we can be. Maybe that's why we receive top marks in every category of the J.D. Power 2019 Advisor Satisfaction Survey. They named us #1 in client support, #1 in firm leadership, #1 in operational support, #1 in compensation, #1 in professional development support, and #1 in technology support. Ready to partner with the best? Call Commonwealth at 866-462-3638 or visit commonwealth.com and feel the power. Member FINRA SIPC, a registered investment advisor. For 2019 J.D. Power award information, visit jdpower.com/awards.
The lifeblood of tech startups isn't just money. It's executive and technical skills. The kind of skills that companies need to build real products. And the skills that venture capitalist Chris Sugden of Edison Partners sees in the graduates that are coming out of New Jersey Institute of Technology.
The amazing thing about NJIT is their graduates, they have multiple offers on average, not just one. They're coming out with real skill sets that are immediately hireable and available to them. I think we see an understanding by the faculty and administration at NJIT that we've got to train and educate the whole student, not just their, one side of their brain. And I do think that's sort of part of the DNA today. There's practical and there's sort of academia, and merging those two together and understanding that if we're going to have our young people go get great jobs and have great successful careers, they've got to have both sides of their brain activated. And I think we see that with NJIT.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. Learn more at njit.edu.
Breathe in and out. Every day, you take 20,000 breaths, potentially exposing yourself to harmful particles of pollution. According to the Royal College of Physicians, air pollution contributes to around 1 in 20 deaths in the UK. But at E.ON, we believe it's time to do something about it. We've committed to installing ultra-fast electric vehicle charge points. We offer solar panels and batteries that collect and store energy. And we've helped a citywide transport operator introduce a large fleet of emission-free electric buses. It's time to clear the air. Search E.ON Clean Air.
3 is a magic number. 300 schemes to help bugs and bees, supporting environmental needs. 8,000 grants for local sports, and performing arts get our support. 7 millionaires every week. The nation's on a winning streak. 30 million pounds to good causes every week. Who'd have thought it? These are magic numbers.
Your numbers make amazing happen. 25 years of the National Lottery.
Rules and procedures apply. Players must be 16 or over. No one wants to wait and wait and wait for that perfect phone. Thankfully, the Tesco Mobile Black Friday event has started already. You can find loads of brilliant phone and SIM deals with low monthly prices and big savings, including time-limited weekly deals. Tesco Mobile's best ever Black Friday event is on. Go in store or search Tesco Mobile. Tesco Mobile. Every little helps.
Best ever Black Friday based on range of products and length of promotional period. See tescomobile.com/terms.
Hacksaw, jigsaw or mitre saw? I'm just not sure.
Sharpening up for a big project? Head to the B&Q Tool Shop.
Get hands-on in-store with our wide range of saws and grinders, including the Black & Decker Scorpion-powered handsaw for just £40. The B&Q Tool Shop. You can do it when you B&Q it.
From Bloomberg Television. Here's Tracy Alloway.
Let's bring in Jonathan Kavanaugh. He is J.P. Morgan Chase's head of Asia EMFX strategy. Given some of the concerns that we've seen in the market, concerns over the Phase 1 trade agreement, concerns over the situation in Hong Kong, what's your pick for a safe haven in the currency space?
I think that people have been generally surprised this year about the extent to which the dollar yen has been fairly resilient. So we haven't seen as much, I guess, yen strength as you might expect given the global headwinds from the economic slowdown, etc., and all of the risk events that we've kind of seen transpire. So I think that kind of reflects to some extent that we're still seeing a fairly strong domestic outflow story from Japan to the rest of the world. And if you listen to what our Japanese strategists are saying, they do expect that continue. So we're not expecting, even over the next kind of 6 to 12 months, much yen strength to come through. So that largely leaves things like the dollar, the Swiss francs, as you kind of mentioned, as probably more of the true safe havens. I think particularly from the dollar against emerging market currencies, I still think the dollar is still going to be the safest play that people view in terms of where they're going to be putting their money if they become concerned about the economic cycle, if they become concerned about the US-China trade conflict as well.
Hear more interviews like this one on Bloomberg Television, streaming live on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg mobile app, or check your local cable listings. Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at TikTok on Twitter. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Stocks in Europe and Asia are retreating along with U.S. stock index futures as investors digest President Trump's latest comments on trade as well as unrest in Hong Kong. And we check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. S&P futures are down 13 points this morning. Dow futures down 114. NASDAQ futures down 44. The DAX in Germany's down 0.9%. 10-year Treasury up 16/30 seconds, yield 1.87%. Yield on the 2-year 1.62%. NYMEX crude oil is down 0.9% or 49 cents at $56.31 a barrel. COMEX gold is up 0.8% or $11.80 at $14.65.50 an ounce. The euro 1.1016 against the dollar. British pound 1.2846 and the yen at 108.91. And attention turns to data on consumer inflation today with the CPI out at 8:30 Wall Street time. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell addresses Congress today as well. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Michael Barr with more on what's going on around the world. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. The impeachment inquiry is going public today. House Democrats will try to make their case that President Trump should be impeached. The president is accused of pressuring Ukraine's president to investigate the Bidens while withholding $400 million in military aid. President Trump welcomes Turkey's President Erdogan for a series of meetings. Relations between the U.S. and Turkey have been strained. The Trump administration is not happy with Erdogan's decision to move ahead with a plan to buy a Russian air defense system. In the NBA, the Knicks and Nets lost. In the NHL, the Rangers won in overtime. The Bruins lost in a shootout. And a baseball note, former Phillies skipper Gabe Kapler has been hired as the new manager of the San Francisco Giants. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and at TikTok, on Twitter, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg, Nathan.
All right, Michael, thank you. It's 5:19 on Wall Street and live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studios. This is Bloomberg Daybreak. Our guest this morning, Mark Vittner, senior U.S. economist at Wells Fargo. Always good talking with you, Mark. I want to get your reaction to President Trump's comments at the Economic Club of New York yesterday, talking up the strength of the American economy, at the same time warning of more tariffs if he doesn't get a Phase 1 trade deal with China. Does that alter your outlook on whether we actually get a deal through?
Well, I still think it's most likely that we're going to get a deal through, and that it'll be one that has various stages to it. The first one will essentially be an agreement in principle of what we're going to agree on. But I don't know what the timing is. I mean, it's very hard to say. And the Hong Kong mess is really an unknown in all of this. And how China responds to this is something that could delay the process. So, I I hate to hear the threat of additional tariffs, because that would really lead to some significant market disruption.
What kind of disruption would it mean for the economy as a whole? I mean, the U.S. economy has been insulated from the impact of tariffs for the most part so far.
Well, it's very hard to say, because we've had so many layers of this tariff war, and but we've seen that economic conditions have improved as it appeared that a deal was close, and Trump did say that they were close to a deal, and I do think that that's the most likely outcome. But we were positioned to raise tariffs. I mean, they pushed back a tariff increase. The U.S. was positioned to raise tariffs prior to the hints that we were going to get a trade deal. So I still think that's the most likely outcome. I think it's just a negotiation is not over until there's a deal.
Do you expect that we'll hear more from the Fed Chairman, Jerome Powell, on the impact of the trade war on the global economy when he sits before Congress later today?
Boy, he's going to have a hard time making headlines, given that he's testifying the same time that they have the impeachment hearings in the House. But I think that we'll talk about how the trade war has impacted the economy. I'll probably have some questions as to why the Fed has continued to cut rates in an environment that in the past would have been full employment. But that's something that Jerome Powell has addressed a few times in recent speeches. So I think he'll focus on those issues, and I imagine they'll address the threat of lengthening the trade war would have on the economy.
Are you expecting that the chairman will have to push back in some way against President Trump's calls for further easing? The president made that case once again yesterday and has certainly not been reluctant to do so in the past.
Well, it's his real estate heritage there. He really likes the low rates. I for one, am not a fan of all the talk about negative interest rates. I don't think that countries that have negative interest rates are doing particularly well, because it's really a sign that there are very few viable investment options in their country. So I certainly don't want to see negative interest rates. But I do think the Fed can afford to be easier for longer, despite the low unemployment rate, because the economic expansion was very narrowly focused, and it's now broadening, and it's pulling more people into the economy. And I think the Fed is really beginning to focus a lot more in economic mobility and improving people's living standards, not just achieving price stability.
So are you thinking that the Fed is at a good level now in terms of the easing, or are you thinking that we could see signals of further easing before the election?
I think it's to be determined. I think it really depends on if we get a trade deal. That's step one. Then we have to see if getting a trade deal causes the economy to pick back up. And if the economy begins to pick back up, then they might be able to just hold where they are. But if we have a weak fourth quarter and don't see a whole lot of signs that things are gaining momentum at the start of 2020, they may cut rates again in March. And we still have that in our forecast, but we didn't have a trade deal this soon either.
Give me a quick answer on this one. What's your prediction on whether a trade deal gets done before the end of the year?
I would say it's probably 2-to-1 odds that we get a trade deal announced before the end of the year, and I think that they will probably meet fairly soon. I heard Larry Kudlow speak yesterday. He said that he would think that maybe the timetable would be the same as it would have been at the APEC meetings, even though they'd have to be able to do that. All right,
got to leave it there for now. Mark Vidner, senior U.S. economist at Wells Fargo. Again, Fed Chairman Jerome Powell appears before the Joint Economic Committee of Congress at 11 a.m. Wall Street time. We will have coverage for it for you here on Bloomberg Radio. Futures pointing to a lower open this morning. This is Bloomberg.
This is a Bloomberg Market Minute. Stock futures indicate a lower Wall Street open this morning. S&P futures down 13, NASDAQ futures down 46, Dow futures down 116. Crude oil is lower, down almost 0.9% at $56.32 a barrel. With earnings season winding down, investor focus turns to trade and the timing of a Phase 1 deal between the U.S. and China. Stocks have rallied to records in recent days on optimism that an accord is imminent. The U.S. House opens public impeachment proceedings today. Fed Chair Jay Powell will address the Joint Economic Committee of Congress. Today we're also watching for the October report on consumer prices. Economists surveyed by Bloomberg are estimating a headline growth number of 0.3% thanks to a rise in gasoline costs. The core index, which takes out energy and food, is projected to show a gain of 0.2%. Gina Cervetti, Bloomberg Radio.
Asset managers who seize change to launch new strategies, add distribution channels, or exploit new technology to re-engineer the investor experience are often rewarded. However, in an industry paralyzed with complexity, few act with agility or decisively. Few run their business strategically. Yet, the most competitive managers in the market know with the right partner and a flexible operating platform, you can. Go boldly toward change with SEI Investment Manager Services.
Determination and operational strength are both essential factors for growth in asset management. I'm Steve Meyer, President, Head of SEI's Investment Manager Services Division. We know that disruptive forces create opportunities around the world. If you see potential in change, our industry specialists will maximize SEI's integrated platform of data and risk management, global investment operations, compliance support, and investor services to position your asset management business for success. Come grow with us.
With SEI Investment Manager Services, you lead the charge in a competitive marketplace. Learn more at SEIC.com/seizechange.
'Tis the season to be hunched over your laptop. Not on our watch. In real life, you can fill your senses and your baskets. Feel all the sights, sounds, lols, and OMGs. Wear laughing emojis on actual smiley faces. Battery is running low. Take the kids to Santa's Grotto. In real life, you can find just the right present using the most advanced search engine in the world. Your eyes. We hunt in real life. Brent Cross, London. Free parking for all sleighs and cars.
I've always loved a kitchen experiment, especially smoothies. I've blended all sorts of mad combinations. Strawberry and charcoal, broccoli and chocolate. Not my best, that. But when I test blenders in the Witch Lab, it's not about flavour, it's about performance. Our tests use proper tough stuff, hard ice, strong veg, rough nuts. And the blenders that can hack it are the only ones we recommend for your kitchen.
Which tests harder so you can buy smarter. Visit which.co.uk.
If you're planning on driving this weekend, expect delays on the A406 North Circular Road. There'll be road closures between Edmonton and Tottenham from 10 p.m. on Friday the 15th of November to 5 a.m. on Monday the 18th of November, while we carry out essential maintenance and repairs. All roads in the surrounding area will be extremely busy, so please allow more time for your journey and expect delays in the area. Plan ahead and check alternative routes at tfl.gov.uk. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters.
No one wants to wait and wait and wait for that perfect phone. Thankfully, the Tesco Mobile Black Friday event has started already. You can find loads of brilliant phone and SIM deals with low monthly prices and big savings, including time-limited weekly deals. Tesco Mobile's best ever Black Friday event is on. Go in store or search Tesco Mobile. Tesco Mobile. Every little helps.
Best ever Black Friday based on range of products and length of promotional period. See tescomobile.com/terms.
This is the Survivalist Network. I told you it was coming. London is now in the full throes of a zombie outbreak. If you do not have an impregnable vehicle, you can still access a Toyota Hilux Invincible. Pre-contagion, it was £199 per month with 0% APR representative. For the good of future generations, friends at your local Toyota Hilux Centre are maintaining that deal. Heed, hurry, Paul. You'll be fine.
0% APR representative on new sales of Hilux Invincible over 42 months. £199 per month. Customer deposit of £9,700
£12,701 when financed through Access Toyota by 16th December 2019. £12,525 optional final payment. Subject to status to over 18s. Indemnities may be required. Conditions apply. Toyota Financial Services.
Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119 and around the globe. The Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
And it's 5:30 on Wall Street. Good morning. I'm Karen Moscow.
And I'm Nathan Hager. Bloomberg Daybreak brought to you by Eisner-Amper. Taxes are one of the certainties of life, but what worked for corporate taxpayers in the past may not work today. Eisner-Amper can help. Visit EisnerAmper.com/tax certainty.
We're just about 4 hours away from the opening of U.S. trading. Let's get you up to date on the news you need to know at this hour. Stocks in Asia and Europe are lower after President Trump warned China on the consequences of not signing a Phase 1 trade deal.
If we don't make a deal, we're going to substantially raise those tariffs. They're going to be raised very substantially.
Still, the president says China is dying to make a deal. We get more from a Bloomberg FX and rate strategist, Richard Jones.
The trade ball's in China's court. If we do get a Phase 1 deal soon, as the president said could happen, then I think recent price action that we've seen, higher equities, higher yields, probably is cemented. However, if China reacts badly to this, then I think we could see a big reversal in a lot of the prices.
Meanwhile, prices are under pressure in Hong Kong after another day of protests. The Hang Seng Index slid 1.8% as city officials and Chinese state media warned violence will not be tolerated. We get more from Bloomberg's Karen Lee in Hong Kong.
Hong Kong's security chief warned of unthinkable consequences if violence continues in the city. The city's number 2 official, Chief Secretary Matthew Chung, also said the government remains confident in its ability to contain the chaos after days of intense unrest in the Asian financial hub. In Hong Kong, Karen Lee, Bloomberg Daybreak.
Karen, thank you. Oil lower for a third day as the International Energy Agency predicts global demand will peak around 2030. It cites the use of electric cars and slowing demand from China as the main drivers. Checking prices now, NYMEX crude oil is down 0.9% or 49 cents at $56.31 a barrel, and Brent is down 1.2% or 77 cents at $61.29.
U.S. futures are lower ahead of U.S. inflation data and remarks from Jerome Powell. The government issues the Consumer Price Index at 8:30 a.m. Wall Street time. The Fed chairman testifies before Congress at 11.
And on the corporate front, shares of Tesla are up 0.5% in early trading after Elon Musk said the company will build a factory in Germany. The CEO says Tesla will manufacture both batteries and cars at the new facility. And again, S&P futures are lower, down 12 points. Dow futures down 107. NASDAQ futures down 42. The DAX in Germany is down 0.8%. 10-year Treasury up 17/30 seconds, yield 1.87%. And the yield on the 2-year at 1.62%. COMEX gold is up 0.7% or $10.60 at $14.6440 an ounce. And straight ahead, we have the latest world and national news. And this is Bloomberg.
All right, Karen, thank you. 5:33 on Wall Street, and Michael Barr has more on what's going on around the world. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Nathan. The public hearings in the House impeachment inquiry begin today. Bloomberg's Ed Baxter has the story.
Democrats have been saying there are a number of avenues to look into that could lead to impeachable offenses. Intelligence Committee member Jackie Spears says one would seem to be bribery.
I have been speaking out about the potentiality of it being bribery for some time. The elements of bribery are there. You have a president using his official office, using taxpayer money to demand from a foreign government that they are bribed to do an investigation to dig up dirt on the president's opponent in the upcoming election.
Democrats say this is the first chance Americans have to hear directly from some of the principals in the investigation. In San Francisco, I'm Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Daybreak.
Hillary Clinton says that she is being urged by, quote, many people to enter the 2020 presidential race and would not rule out a third White House bid, though she has no plans to run. President Trump says he does not care if former President Obama is more well-liked with Europe and its leaders.
They recently came out with a poll that President Obama is much more popular in Germany than I am. I said, guess what? He should be. He should be. The day I'm more popular than him, you know I'm not doing my job. Let's put it that way.
The president spoke at the Economic Club of New York yesterday. President Trump hosted a meeting with the president of Turkey as relations between the two NATO allies are at their lowest point in decades. Turkey is facing backlash over attacks on Kurdish civilians during its incursion into Syria last month. Some members of Congress say Turkish President Erdogan does not deserve a White House invite. Republican Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana, a Trump ally, says Erdogan needs to side either with the U.S. or Russia.
If there were a bill brought to sanction Turkey, I'd certainly seriously consider it.
President Trump holds a joint news conference today with Erdogan. The International Energy Agency says global greenhouse gas pollution rose for a second year. According to its annual report, emissions levels would have to start falling almost immediately to bring the world into line with ambitions in the Paris Agreement. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and at TikTok, on Twitter. Powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg, Nathan.
Thank you, Michael. 5:35 on Wall Street. Time for the Bloomberg NBC Sports Update. Here's John Stashower.
Nathan, latest Knick loss in Chicago. The Bulls, one of only two teams the Knicks have been able to defeat this season. The game was tied to 3 quarters, but in the fourth, Bulls went on a 24-2 run. Rookie Kobe White made 7 3-point shots. Chicago beat David Fizdale's Knicks 120-102.
Broke the game open. We were tit for tat there for a long time. And, I mean, wow. Just wow. He really he put on a show. And he had a step back going to his right that had to be 28 to 30 feet deep. And that's when you're really rolling. And we just had no answer for him.
Knicks are 2-9 amid reports Fizdale's in danger of getting fired. The Nets fell to 4-6, outscored by 20 in the second half. Lost at Utah 119-114. At the Garden, Rangers beat the Penguins 3-2 in overtime. Game winner by Kaapo Kakko, the 18-year-old from Finland, who the Rangers just drafted with the second overall pick. St. John's went to 3-0, beat New Hampshire 74-61. Evansville, hosted by one-time Knick, former Kentucky star Walter McCarty, upset top-ranked Kentucky at Rupp Arena. The Aces came in as a 25-point underdog. If the college football season ended now, Alabama would not be in the 14 playoff, something they've never not been in. Bama's home loss to LSU dropped them down, but only to 5th behind LSU, Ohio State, Clemson, and Georgia. Gabe Kapler, fired by the Phillies, is the new manager of the Giants. The Twins' Rocco Baldelli edged out Aaron Boone for American League Manager of the Year. Could Colin Kaepernick get back into the NFL? Hasn't played since 2016 when he began taking a knee during the national anthem. He'll work out and talk to teams on Saturday. With Bloomberg NBC Sports Update, I'm John Stashower. Nathan?
All right, thank you, John. It's 5:37 on Wall Street, and the latest edition of Bloomberg Business Week is on newsstands now, with the cover on why Bob Iger is taking the gloves off for Disney's streaming debut. Also in this week's issue, our annual ranking of the world's best business schools. Joel Weber helped compile the list for Bloomberg Business Week.
We really tried to lean into the networks and the students and the alumni and actually start asking questions to them about their experiences. And that's what really makes this ranking be so definitive.
You can read that ranking and other stories in this week's edition of Bloomberg Business Week on newsstands now and online at businessweek.com. Terminal customers can subscribe to the magazine at MAG Go. And you can listen to Business Week with Carol Masser and Jason Kelly weekdays at 2 p.m. Wall Street time here on Bloomberg Radio. It's 5:38 on Wall Street. Time now for the Tri-State Business Report with Bloomberg's Ed Corey. Good morning, Ed.
Morning, Nathan. David Levy is resigning as Chief Executive Officer of the Brooklyn Nets, stepping down from the job he assumed less than 2 months ago. Levy was named CEO of the team in Barclays Center in September. The Post gave Levy oversight of the Alibaba Group billionaire's fast-growing sports, media, and entertainment empire. New Jersey Assemblyman Nicholas Chiara-Vallotti plans to formally introduce a trio of bills this week. They would increase transparency of fiscal operations in acute care hospitals. They would also expand what state officials can consider as they assess their financial health. Well, the monument to Bridgeport, Connecticut's past has a new owner. CT Insider reports LT Bridgeport, a limited liability corporation with an address in Owings Mills, Maryland, paid $1.1 million for the vacant Stop and Shop supermarket on Madison Avenue. That's your Bloomberg Tri-State Business Report. I'm Ed Corey. Nathan?
All right, Ed, thank you. 5:39 on Wall Street. Bloomberg Radio is on the air from San Francisco to New York, London to Hong Kong. Let's check in with our global news team for some of the top stories heard on our 300 affiliate radio stations around the world.
I'm
Jeff Bellinger, and on WLW in Cincinnati, I'm reporting that Apple is about to roll out a redesigned MacBook Pro laptop.
I'm Gina Cervetti, and on WFLA in Orlando, I'm reporting that Nike will end a pilot project selling products on Amazon.
I'm Roger Hearing. On Bloomberg DAB Digital Radio in London, we're reporting on Labour's plans to spend £155 billion on the National Health Service by 2023-24.
I'm Ed Corey on WWJ in Detroit. I'm reporting it looks like most of the auto workers voting on Ford's new contract with the union have accepted the deal.
And those are some of the stories our 2,700 Bloomberg journalists and analysts are working on this morning around the world. Another story we're watching this morning, earnings from one iPhone assembler in Taiwan point to solid demand for Apple's newest device. Han High Precision is out with results that topped estimates. That company assembles most of Apple's iPhones and typically gears up for production months ahead of the launch of a device. S&P futures are lower this morning, down 12 points. Dow futures down 106. NASDAQ futures lower by almost 42 points. The 10-year yield is at 1.87%, 2-year 1.62%. You're listening to Bloomberg Daybreak.
Have you wanted to speak a new language, but you thought it'd be too hard or take too much time? Then go to Babbel.com, download the app, and try it for free. In just 15 minutes a day, you'll be on your way to speaking a new language in just a few weeks. And right now, you can try Babbel for free. Babbel starts out teaching you words and phrases by matching them with pictures. You won't believe how easy the interactive program is. Soon the sentences get a little bigger, and before you know it, you're having simulated conversations voiced by native speakers. And because Babbel is crafted by language experts and uses the spaced repetition method, in just 10 to 15 minutes a day, you'll be speaking the language of your choice with real confidence. With Babbel, you can speak a language. Just go to Babbel.com and start your first lesson in the language of your choice for free. Download the Babbel app or go to Babbel.com and try it for free. That's Babbel.com.
Hey y'all, Jeff Foxworthy here. Now, if you've ever found yourself repeating the same thing over and over for 75 years, you might be Smokey Bear.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
That's why I'm filling in for Smokey to switch things up, because there's a lot more to say. And I should know because my grandfather was a firefighter. And one of the things he taught me is that the people that love the outdoors the most are often the ones accidentally starting wildfires, which means always BYOB. No, bring your own bucket to the campfire. And be extra careful with things like burning yard trimmings. Don't just walk away, or chances are you might be starting a wildfire. So for the love of the outdoors, go to SmokeyBear.com to learn more about wildfire prevention. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
Make their Christmas wishes come true. Whether they want to jet off on Barbie's dream plane, run with the storm in Fortnite, or glide along on My Lovely Llama. At littlewoods.com, you'll find all the toys they love, all with inclusive delivery and free returns. Own Christmas. Shop now at littlewoods.com.
For the independent bookseller who found you that first edition. For the baker who brings the smell of freshly baked bread to your door.
And for the barista who never needs to ask your name.
We've all got a part to play.
Every little tap keeps your high street alive.
And helps your communities thrive.
So if you love where you live, shop small.
Shopping on your local high street can make a big difference. Shop small. Only by American Express.
If your ideas challenge the status quo, if you have advised people you had no right advising, if you built companies and lost companies and built them again, if you've been called a pillock, a dreamer, an innovator and a genius, if you thrive in the 11th hour, if you have blown it and completely nailed it in the same day, prepare for your next departure.
Do business right. Travel Virgin Atlantic.
Hacksaw, jigsaw, or miter saw? I'm just not sure.
Sharpening up for a big project? Head to the B&Q Tool Shop. Get hands-on in-store with our wide range of saws and grinders, including the Black & Decker Scorpion-powered handsaw for just £40. The B&Q Tool Shop. You can do it when you B&Q it.
From Ratman, creator of Shiro's Story, comes Blue Story, the groundbreaking movie of a generation, the story of Timmy.
You know I'm not part of the gang, man.
And Marco.
My brother knows you're my guy, trust me.
Brought together by friendship.
I love this guy, you know.
Divided by postcodes.
Who done this to you? Your boy's done it.
An eye for a night, sometimes innocence die.
My boys, if you live in them ends, you're one of them.
Why are you letting your brother brainwash you?
Whoever ain't riding with, man, is riding against, man.
That's my son in there. I'm his mother, and no one ain't come to tell me nothing.
Ratman's Blue Story. In cinemas, November 22. Certificate 15.
Gosh, can we put the heating on?
Sorry, it's broken.
Can I play some tunes on my phone then?
Yeah, afraid not. Play CDs, though.
This car belongs in a scrapyard.
I know, but I get nothing if I scrapped it.
Actually, you can get at least £2,000 off a new Ford for it.
Really?
With Ford's new for old scrappage scheme, you can get between £2,000 and £4,250 off a new Ford car if you scrap an eligible vehicle with us responsibly. Also, there's 0% APR representative on Ford options. Ford. Together, we go further. Search Ford Scrappage. Exclusions apply. Contracted and registered by 31st of December 2019 at participating dealers. Age and ownership criteria apply to scrappage vehicle. Subject to status. Free post Ford credit.
4 hours a day, on air and at TikTok on Twitter. Powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. This is Bloomberg Radio. Now, a global news update.
The first public impeachment inquiry hearing begins in just a few hours. Correspondent Jessica Schneider says veteran diplomat William Taylor will be targeted by Republicans.
With just hours before the public hearing, Republicans are attacking the top diplomat to Ukraine, Bill Taylor. In closed-door testimony, Taylor revealed he was told that Ukraine would not receive military money until officials announced the investigations the president wanted. But Taylor admitted he never spoke directly with the president, a point Republicans have seized upon. But Democrats say they're just trying to muddy the waters.
A blast of Arctic air has swept into the eastern two-thirds of the United States. About 70% of the U.S. population is expected to see temperatures at or below freezing this morning. Even parts of the deep south are under freeze watches, warnings, or advisories, including South Texas and the Florida Panhandle. Winter has arrived. I'm Christopher Cruz.
Why all the top-tier experts? Because business is not a magic trick.
Give us a sense of the economic backdrop.
Bloomberg Markets.
Which financial records are these?
Weekday mornings at 10 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio. Bloomberg, the world is listening. Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at TikTok on Twitter. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Stocks in Europe and Asia are retreating, along with U.S. stock index futures, as investors digest President Trump's latest comments on trade, as well as unrest in Hong Kong. We check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. S&P futures down 12 points, Dow futures down 106, NASDAQ futures down 40. The DAX in Germany's down 0.8%. 10-year Treasury up 17/30 seconds, yield 1.87%. Yield on the 2-year 1.62%. NYMEX crude oil down 0.9% or 48 cents at 56.32 a barrel. COMEX gold up 0.8% or $11.30 at 14.65 an ounce. The euro 1.1013 against the dollar. British pound 1.2853 and the yen at 108.92. And that's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Michael Barr with more on what's going on around the world. Michael.
Karen, impeachment hearings for President Donald Trump make their public debut today. Democrats are calling 2 witnesses, another Friday, and 8 more next week. Trump is accused of trying to tie U.S. aid to Ukraine to investigations of his political opponents. Former President Jimmy Carter is said to be recovering this morning at Atlanta's Emory University Hospital, a day after surgery to relieve pressure on his brain. In the NBA, the Knicks and Nets lost. In the NHL, the Rangers won in overtime. The Bruins lost in a shootout. And a baseball note, former Philly skipper Gabe Kapler has been hired as the new manager of the San Francisco Giants. Global news, 24 hours a day, on air and at TikTok on Twitter. Powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg Opinion, informed perspectives, and expert data-driven commentary on breaking news.
And it's coming up to 5:49 on Wall Street, and it is time to check in with Bloomberg Opinion. Columnist Tim Culpin joins us from our Taipei Bureau. Tim is looking at earnings from Tencent this morning, and Tim, one Hong Kong-based analyst called the results from the Chinese tech giant unbearable. What's catching your eye this morning?
Well, unbearable is one word for it. Look, it was very tepid top-line growth, only 21% revenue growth, which is it's not the lowest in recent history, but it's certainly on the low end. A couple of years ago, they were posting 40, 50% growth. So, that definitely is weak. The major thing for them is that the advertising business has really slowed down a lot. But thankfully for Tencent, it is not a major part of their business. They're still basically a games company. And so the upside, if you're looking for upside, is the fact that smartphone games did grow 25% year over year. And this is an area that's going to keep growing. They had a bit of an annus horribilis last year in games and earlier this year as well, but they've come out with some new titles, including some patriotic titles, one is called Homeland Dream. So we could expect to see some upside in the next few quarters, but for sure the third quarter, which ended in September, was pretty bad.
Do you expect to see that upside in China, given the slowdown for the overall economy there, particularly the consumer-facing economy in China?
Yeah, I think the consumer-facing economy, from them, it's really ads. Look, at the end of the day, games is essentially a consumer play, right? But it tends to be stickier. People tend to be a little bit addicted. It might be one of the things that people, will hold on to in terms of expenditure. They also do have a growing content business. They have their own streaming service, which includes titles that they produce themselves, as well as sports. They broadcast the NBA, amongst other things. So there's a certain areas of business that they do have that I think are a little bit sticky, that allows them to rely a lot less on advertising.
Now, in the past, you've called for splitting up Tencent. Do these results bolster that case further, and what should the company unwind?
Very much so. In fact, I wrote that column yesterday saying they should split it up, and today's results basically prove my point. I think they should split off their fintech business. WeChat Payments is very, very big for them. It grew 36% in terms of revenue for the quarter. They also get money from wealth management and other things, but it's really kind of hidden inside all of the other businesses. If they split it off and even were to list it, I think they could unlock a lot of upside to the market cap, and investors would be more interested in coming back in and playing with Tencent in terms of a buy.
So then if Tencent were to focus more on the games portion of its business, how could it poise itself for growth?
I think if it keeps coming out with patriotic titles, a lot of the big problems that really it faced in the last year or two was getting on the bad side of regulators. And it wasn't just them. There's a lot of other companies involved as well that really had a kind of a freeze on new game titles. They've come out at the other end of that, and they've been very proactive in dealing with some of the things that Beijing has shown concerns over, including addiction. There is a big concern about smartphone gaming addiction, especially amongst youths, and they've tackled that head on with some of their own measures to kind of slow that down or stop people getting addicted. So I think they're very good at walking the regulatory tightrope, and I think that will serve them well over the next few quarters.
What do you think are the chances that Tencent does focus more on its games business and hone in?
Well, games really are, at the end of the day, the bread and butter of the company. People kind of lost sight of that for a few years because we look at WeChat with, over 1 billion users and we think, wow, this is the heart and soul of Tencent. It's not really from a revenue point of view. They do manage to squeeze money out of the social media side of the business by basically feeding ads through its timeline, kind of like a Facebook timeline, if you will. But they don't leverage it as much as we see in Western companies like Facebook and Twitter or Snapchat. They could certainly leverage that more, but they don't need to, and they probably won't for the next near-term future. So I think it really will still be games that they'll focus on.
And just quickly, just a couple seconds left, what does Tencent's results say about the health of the overall Chinese economy?
I think the weakness in advertising really tells you that people should buckle up and be ready for some weakness in the next few quarters in the macro economy in China.
Tim Culpen, Bloomberg Opinion columnist, thank you for joining us this morning from our Taipei Bureau. And you can read more from Bloomberg Opinion at Bloomberg.com/opinion or by typing OPIN GO on the Bloomberg terminal. Karen.
Nathan, thank you. It is 5:53 on Wall Street. It's time for the Bloomberg Law Report. Let's get to the legal stories we're watching this morning from Bloomberg's Jeff Bellinger.
The Seventh Circuit upheld a Securities and Exchange Commission fine of more than $1.5 million for a trader involved with a biodiesel stock fraud scheme. Gary Willicke argued a lower court did not take into account his cooperation with the SEC. A court in Florida ruled former NFL player Tyrone Keys cannot stop the league from clawing back disability benefits, even though the league waited more than a decade to seek the repayment. And voters in San Francisco approved a new tax for passengers who book rides with Uber, Lyft, and other such services.
Bloomberg Law. Everything you need on one legal research platform. Guidance, analysis, and Bloomberg Market Intelligence. Find out more at BloombergLaw.com.
And now another legal item we're watching. Yesterday's arguments at the Supreme Court over DACA. The justices seem inclined to let the Trump administration cancel the program that shields nearly 700,000 young undocumented immigrants from deportation. For more on the story, David Weston speaks with the Bloomberg Supreme Court reporter Greg Stohr, who was in the courtroom for the arguments.
Well, it was mostly favorable for the Trump administration, not overwhelmingly so, but the conservative justices did seem inclined to let him rescind DACA if that's what he wants to do. It was an argument that was many times kind of heavy on the legal technicalities, and then people would step back and talk about the very massive humanitarian impact that this case could have. We're talking about almost 700,000 people who right now are shielded from deportation and have the right to seek work because of the DACA program.
What is the main issue they're focusing on? Because I understand there are two things: whether it was lawful ever to do DACA, in which case clearly it shouldn't be done, or whether it may have been lawful to do it, but the president has the discretion to pull it back.
Right. The Trump administration's arguments have sort of evolved as time went on. Initially, what they said was that first thing, that DACA is illegal, therefore we have no choice, we have to rescind it. And as time went on, the administration has started adding some policy rationales, because there was the suggestion that if the entire rescission depended on this judgment that DACA was illegal, well, they might need some additional reasons other than that. And nobody contests that the Trump administration could do this if they did it the right way. The question now is, did they do it the right way?
It's always dangerous, as you and I say, to try to read from the bench. But did the bench seem to indicate, at least the majority of the bench indicate, that yes, they could pass, it's called the Administrative Procedure Act policies?
A majority suggested that they would let the administration do this. It might be a couple different rationales. There's an argument that courts shouldn't even be involved in this at all. This is something that the agency gets to decide on its own. And then there was the argument that the Trump administration did give those reasons that were good enough. In particular, there was a 3-page memo put out by then Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen of the Homeland Security Department, explaining not just the legal rationale that DACA was illegal, but also saying it's our policy judgment that we need to enforce our immigration laws and we shouldn't have such a categorical exclusion. So between those multiple rationales, the administration looks like it stands at this point a reasonably good chance of getting 5 votes from the conservatives.
And as Bloomberg Supreme Court reporter Greg Stohr speaking with David Weston, you can hear more legal analysis like this on Bloomberg Balance of Power, weekdays at 12 p.m. Wall Street time here on Bloomberg Radio, and find more legal news at BloombergLaw.com. Attorneys will find exceptional legal research and business development tools there as well. Visit BloombergLaw.com for more information. S&P futures are lower this morning, down about 12 points. Dow futures down 104, NASDAQ futures down 40, and the 10-year Treasury up 16/30 seconds, yield 1.87%. And Bloomberg Daybreak continues. This is Bloomberg.
At the Bank of Antandek, mortgages are on the menu.
I was in the chippy last night, and it hit me.
Go on.
We should give all our new mortgage customers £1,000 of spuds.
Potatoes?
Yeah, jackets, roasties, dauphinoise. I mean, what's not to love?
Hey, yeah, we could call it
Mashback. Genius.
Meanwhile, at Santander, they're giving their customers £1,000 cash back on selected first-time buyer mortgages. See what's possible at Santander.
Lending subject to status and criteria. Cashback given on completion and repayable if mortgage closed within 2 years. Offer can be withdrawn.
Your home may be repossessed if you do not keep up repayments on your mortgage.
Whatever job you're searching for, you can find it on LinkedIn. First jobs, flexible jobs, work from home on a Friday jobs, advertising jobs, accounting jobs, HR, PR, even ER jobs, Soho jobs, Shoreditch jobs. Keep me away from the central line jobs. Banking jobs, building jobs, never ever boring jobs. Small jobs, big jobs, lunch in Borough Market jobs, or even voiceover jobs, which is how I ended up recording this ad. Search millions of jobs on LinkedIn and find one meant for you.
Financial capital of the world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and at TikTok on Twitter. This is Bloomberg Radio.
Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studios, this is Bloomberg Daybreak for Wednesday, November 13th, 2019. Coming up this hour.
Global stocks retreat as President Trump once again threatens more tariffs on China.
Violence in Hong Kong weighs on sentiment as crowds gather in the city for a third day.
Oil falls after a new forecast says peak demand could come as soon as 2030.
The public hearings in the impeachment inquiry begin today, plus Turkey's president visits the White House. I'm Michael Barr. More ahead.
I'm John Stashower in sports. Another loss for the Knicks. In Chicago, Nets blew a lead, fell in Utah. Rangers an overtime win over Pittsburgh.
That's all straight ahead on Bloomberg Daybreak. On Bloomberg 1130 New York, Bloomberg 99.1 Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 106.1 Boston, Bloomberg 960 San Francisco, Sirius XM 119, and around the world on BloombergRadio.com and via the Bloomberg Business app.
Good morning, I'm Karen Moscow.
And I'm Nathan Hager. Bloomberg Daybreak is brought to you by Interactive Brokers, the professional's gateway to the world's markets. IBKR Pro offers investors enhanced price execution, the lowest margin rates, and access to their powerful trader workstation. Learn more at IBKR.com.
And global stocks are losing ground this morning. 6:01 on Wall Street, and we check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. S&P futures are down 12 points this morning. Dow futures down 107. NASDAQ futures down 41. The DAX in Germany is down 0.8%. The CAC in Paris down 0.5%. And the FTSE 100 down 0.6%. The Nikkei 225 in Japan was down 0.9%. And the Hang Seng in Hong Kong fell 1.8%. 10-year Treasury up 17.30 seconds. Yield 1.87%. Yield on the 2-year 1.62%. NYMEX crude oil down 0.8% or 46 cents at 56.33 a barrel. COMEX gold is up 0.8% or $11.50 at 14.6520 an ounce. The euro is at 1.1013 against the dollar. The yen 108.92. Nathan.
And Karen, we begin with the latest on U.S.-China trade talks and President Trump warning Beijing about the consequences of not signing a Phase 1 deal soon.
If we don't make a deal, we're going to substantially raise those tariffs. They're going to be raised very substantially.
Still, the president says China is, quote, dying to make a deal. We get more now from Bloomberg FX and rate strategist Richard Jones.
What Trump's speech did is it really firmly put the trade ball in China's court. He really upped the ante, raised the stakes, and as a result, I think it's all going to come down to how does China receive this latest rhetoric or the messaging from the president.
Now, location to sign a deal is still up in the air. Sources say sites in Asia and Europe are currently under consideration.
Well, China listens to President Trump. It's also watching Hong Kong, where crowds gathered for a third straight day. Chinese state media is responding with harsh rhetoric. The Global Times goes so far as to warn of military intervention from Beijing, and some protesters say that's exactly what they want. Bloomberg's Stephen Engel has more from Hong Kong.
If Beijing cracks down harder, if they invoke national security provisions, and Beijing takes a hard line, some of the protesters say that will justify what they are trying to call for. That would spark what they hope is international condemnation. On the other hand, those here in Hong Kong who want a more civil society are saying this is not good because Beijing could force the cancellation of district council elections on November 24th, which could be leaning towards more pro-democracy candidates. So this is a very tenuous time, obviously, for Hong Kong's future. The protesters say this is the only way that they're going to get their demands met. Hong Kong government and Beijing are basically saying, no, this is wishful thinking.
Bloomberg's Stephen Engel reports public schools in Hong Kong were closed today and classes have already been canceled for tomorrow. The city's security chief warns of, quote, unthinkable consequences if the violence continues.
The unrest in Hong Kong hit stocks in Asia again today, with the Hang Seng leading declines in the region. Bloomberg's Juliet Sally joins us from Singapore with details. Good morning, Juliet.
Good morning, Nathan and Karen. Local developers and landlords suffered the brunt of the selling in Hong Kong as nearly all stocks on the Hang Seng dropped, sending the index to a one-month low. Few clear signs of progression on the trade front added to the downbeat mood across Asia. Japanese stocks giving up Tuesday's gains and Australia's ASX 200 declining for a second session. Stocks in mainland China were little changed. Elsewhere, the Kiwi jumped the most in a year and New Zealand bond yield surged after the RBNZ surprised the market by keeping the official cash rate on hold at 1%, defying widespread expectations of a cut. In Singapore, I'm Juliet Saleh, Bloomberg Daybreak.
All right, Juliet, thank you. Back here in the U.S., traders are focused on Jerome Powell today. The Fed chairman testifies before Congress at 11 a.m. Wall Street time. Here with more is Bloomberg's Michael McKee.
The Fed chairman is likely to signal once again that monetary policy is on hold, likely at least until after next year's election. Expect members of Congress to press him on the impact of trade wars, they're bad, and the possibility of more fiscal stimulus, good in a recession, but not likely. Powell speaks twice this week. He follows his testimony to the Joint Economic Committee with an appearance Thursday before the House Budget Committee. Michael McKee, Bloomberg Daybreak.
And Mike, also on today's agenda, data on U.S. inflation due out at 8:30 a.m. Wall Street time. Economists predict the consumer price index gained 0.3% in October. Here with details is Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
Recent inflation data have been tepid. In September, the CPI was unchanged, the first month without an increase since January. Excluding food and energy, core CPI rose 0.1%, the smallest increase since May. Bloomberg Economics says October's data should point to rising costs for autos and apparel. Both declined in September. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Daybreak.
Vinny, thank you. Oil declining for a third day as the International Energy Agency predicts global demand will peak around 2030. It cites the use of electric cars and slowing demand from China as the main drivers. We get more from Bloomberg's Stephen Stabzinski.
We have more efficient vehicles being developed that will use less gasoline. You also have the emergence of electric vehicles that will require no gasoline at all. At the same time, the IEA said that they see a cliff of Chinese demand for oil dropping. And this is significant because oil demand growth has been underpinned by China over the last 2 decades.
And checking prices now, NYMEX crude oil is down about 0.8% or 42 cents at $56.38 a barrel, and Brent is down 1.1% at $61.35.
And on the corporate front, shares of Tesla are up 0.6% in early trading. That's after Elon Musk announced his company will build a factory in Germany. The CEO says Tesla will make both batteries and cars at a new facility near Berlin.
And we have this headline, Crossing the Bloomberg. Tech Data has agreed to be acquired by Apollo Global Management in a deal valued at around $5.4 billion. The move will take Tech Data private and values the company at a 24% premium to its closing price on October 15th. And futures this morning are lower. Straight ahead, we have the latest world and national news, and this is Bloomberg.
All right, thanks, Karen. 6:07 on Wall Street. Michael Barr has the latest on what's going on around the world. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Nathan. Americans will get their first look at witnesses' testimony against President Donald Trump when the House Intelligence Committee begins to hold public impeachment hearings today. House Intelligence Committee Chair Adam Schiff says that he is not prepared to make any specific accusations against the president before evidence is heard.
The standard we'll have to evaluate is whether these facts show bribery, treason, high crimes, or misdemeanors. And ultimately, that's the decision we'll have to make.
Republican Representative Steve Scalise said the inquiry is taking Congress away from more important work.
They have this obsession with impeachment when the two participants in the phone call made it very clear there was no pressure, no quid pro quo, there was nothing inappropriate.
Today's hearings will start with William Taylor, the current top U.S. diplomat in Ukraine, and State Department official George Kent. Could Hillary Clinton make a third run for the White House? Clinton told the BBC she's under pressure by many to consider a 2020 run, but adds it's not in her plans at the moment. Turkey's President Erdogan sees today's meeting with President Trump as critical to patching some serious cracks dividing the NATO allies. Bloomberg's Bob Moon has a preview.
Still outraged over Turkey's invasion of northern Syria and its purchase of Russian missiles, Republican Senator John Kennedy says were it up to him, he wouldn't be inviting Erdogan to the White House.
President Erdogan, God bless him, he's going to decide on whose side he's on.
Leaving Ankara, the Turkish leader said he's determined to clear up what he called foggy weather in our relations. Kennedy wants more than that.
He's either on our side or he's on Russia's side, but he can't have it both ways.
It's notable that Erdogan has so far defied U.S. calls to hold off activating the new Russian missile system and playing both sides off each other. He told reporters he plans to talk to Vladimir Putin after meeting with Trump. Bob Moon, Bloomberg Daybreak.
A federal judge in New York has struck down an attempt by the Trump administration to undermine parts of Obamacare. The judge struck down the Department of Health and Human Services rule that allowed certain health care providers to abstain from abortions, sterilizations, and other services based on a religious or moral objection. New York, which led 19 states in the opposition, said the rule was an unlawful attempt to allow health care providers to openly discriminate and refuse necessary care. Global news 24 hours a day on air and at TikTok, on Twitter, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg, Nathan.
All right. Thank you, Michael. 6:09 on Wall Street. Time for the Bloomberg NBC Sports Update. Here's John Stashauer.
Nathan, as the losses mount, the seat gets hotter for Knicks coach David Fizdale. His boss, team president Steve Mills, recently held an impromptu presser to say he was disappointed in the team's play. Last night's 120-102 loss at Chicago won't help Fizdale's cause to keep his job. Bulls rookie Kobe White hit 7 3-point shots just in the fourth quarter. Finished with 27 points. Marcus Morris led the Knicks with 22. Nets blew a 15-point second-half lead. Lost at Utah 119-114. Kyrie Irving scored 27 but missed 20 of his 30 shots, missed 10 of 12 three-pointers. Rangers a good win at the Garden, 3-2 in overtime over Pittsburgh. Rookie Capo Caco, 2 goals, including the game winner. St. John's went to 3-0, 74-61 over New Hampshire. LJ Figueroa scored 25 in a huge upset. The number 1 team in the nation, Kentucky, lost at home to Evansville, who came in as a 25-point underdog. Close vote for American League Manager of the Year. It went to Minnesota's Rocco Baldelli. The Yankees' Aaron Boone got the same number of first-place votes, but 4 writers didn't even have Boone among the top 3. The Cy Youngs go out tonight. We'll see if the Mets ace Jacob deGrom can be a repeat winner. Bye week for the Giants. When they return, Saquon Barkley out to show he's better than his performance Sunday against the Jets when he had 13 carries and 1 yard.
I do feel like myself. I mean, I would love to be going for 100 yards every game. I would love to be doing the things I was doing last year. Trust me, I don't like the fact that I was able to have 1 yard against a great team, and respect to them. But to say that I'm not healthy or this and that and third, those are just excuses. Everyone's banged up. Everyone's going through something, and I'm not going to let that be an excuse of why I'm not having a successful season.
With the Bloomberg NBC Sports Update, I'm John Stashauer. Nathan?
And John, in other sports news, Nike is breaking up with Amazon. It'll stop selling products directly through the website, ending a pilot program that began in 2017. Nike is overhauling its retail strategy, going after e-commerce sales without Amazon's help. S&P futures are lower by 12 points. You're listening to Bloomberg Daybreak.
Startups and research universities like New Jersey Institute of Technology are fueling the innovation economy. And few people are better positioned to see what's on the horizon in New Jersey than physicist and state representative Andrew Zwicker.
How technology is transforming our financial sector is revolutionary, and so much of that is in New Jersey. We are innovators when it comes to agriculture, and there is opportunity now for great transformation in how are we going to grow food in an ever-growing population, and how do we turn urban centers into agricultural centers. Autonomous vehicles is another one where we have some of the world's leading experts, and how this will transform how those who are either elderly or are visually impaired or mobilely impaired can start to use autonomous vehicles to transform their lives and have access to transportation they could have never had before.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. Learn more at njit.edu/research.
Asset managers who seize change to launch new strategies, add distribution channels, or exploit new technology to re-engineer the investor experience are often rewarded. However, in an industry paralyzed with complexity, few act with agility or decisively. Few run their businesses strategically, yet the most competitive managers in the market know with the right partner and a flexible operating system, you can. Go boldly toward change with SCI Investment Manager Services.
Determination and operational
operational strength are both essential factors for growth in asset management. I'm Steve Meyer, President and Head of SEI's Investment Manager Services Division. We know that disruptive forces create opportunities around the world. If you see potential in change, our industry specialists will maximize SEI's integrated platform of data and risk management, global investment operations, compliance support, and investor services to position your asset management business for success. Come grow with us.
With SEI Investment Manager Services, you lead the charge in a competitive marketplace. Learn more at SEIC.com/seize change.
Tis the season to be hunched over your laptop. Not on our watch. In real life, you can fill your senses and your baskets. Feel all the sights, sounds, lols, and OMGs. Wear laughing emojis on actual smiley faces. Battery is running low. Take the kids to Santa's Grotto. In real life, you can find just the right present using the most advanced search engine in the world. Your eyes. We heart in real life. Brent Cross, London. Free parking for all sleighs and cars.
Okay, Mr. Smith, tell me what happened.
Well, I just sat down when pow.
Pow?
Pow, right in the mouth.
And can you describe the assailants?
There were 3 of them.
And how are they dressed?
With rosemary garnish and a red wine jus.
Jus?
Jus.
Well, it's like a gravy, is it? Oh. Any potatoes at the scene?
Oh, yes. Mashed with garlic.
That's a serious assault.
There was no salt.
Lamb. Hits you in the chops. More knockout recipes at simplylamb.co.uk.
I've always loved a kitchen experiment, especially smoothies. I've blended all sorts of mad combinations. Strawberry and charcoal, broccoli and chocolate. Not my best, that. But when I test blenders in the Witch Lab, it's not about flavour, it's about performance. Our tests use proper tough stuff, hard ice, strong veg, rough nuts. And the blenders that can hack it are the only ones we recommend for your kitchen.
Which tests harder so you can buy smarter. Visit which.co.uk.
In cinemas November 15.
So you're going to build a car to beat Ferrari?
With a Ford.
Correct.
Get ready for Le Mans 66.
I hate guys like us because we're different.
Starring Matt Damon and Christian Bale.
What are they doing? Making your car go faster. That's more like it!
Based on the incredible true story.
You got a plan? It's high risk.
Of Ford versus Ferrari.
No, I thought the whole point was to win the damned race.
Le Mans 66.
Hit it.
In cinemas and IMAX November 15.
This winter, why not take the short flight from London to Dublin with Aer Lingus from just $32.99 each way as part of a return trip. From coastal walks to cozy pubs and friendly locals, you'll find so much to enjoy once you're there. Smart takes a Dublin city break. Smart flies Aer Lingus. Book now at airlingus.com. Terms and conditions apply.
Influential conversations from Bloomberg Television. Here's Taylor Riggs.
It is all about Disney and their much anticipated debut of its new streaming service, which was hit by early technical glitches and crashes for some users. But that didn't stop the excitement and buzz on social media and worked successfully for many subscribers. Joining us now, it is True Optic CEO Andre Swanson. Andre, your take, is the glitch outage a good thing? Because it means demand exceeded expectations.
Well, yeah, normally it's an indicator that there's a lot more people trying to access your solution when you're having some scaling issues earlier on. In the big scheme of things, I think it's a non-event. It's a very successful day for Disney overall.
Where does Disney fit in your world of all of the streaming competitors?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. I think most people in the industry are looking at it incorrectly. They're looking at as if Disney Plus is a competitor for Netflix. I think Disney has already shown over the last couple of years with getting the majority ownership of Hulu, with the success of ESPN Plus, and now Disney Plus. They have a winning strategy about how to attack that market, but they're not really competing with Netflix. Disney has done a better job than anybody at getting share of wallet when it comes to media and entertainment dollars.
Hear more interviews like this one on Bloomberg Television, streaming live on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg mobile app. Or check your local cable listings. Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at TikTok on Twitter. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm Karen Moscow at 6:17 on Wall Street. And this Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by IBKR and CME Group. The new Micro E-mini futures contracts are available at IBKR at the lowest commissions. Learn more at ibkr.com/CME Mini. Bloomberg Daybreak is out on customer terminals, bringing you all the news you need to start your day. Let's get a check at the latest headlines with Hannah George at the Bloomberg Daybreak desk. Good morning, Hannah.
Good morning, Karen. Jerome Powell may try to steer markets on the rate path when he addresses Congress today. The Fed chairman's assessment of policy is unlikely to have changed much since his October 30th press conference. The impeachment inquiry goes public today. We'll hear testimony from the top envoy to Ukraine, William Taylor, and State Department official George Kent. The stormy US-Turkey relationship resurfaces as President Trump and Erdogan meet at the White House. It's their first meeting since the diplomatic spat over Turkey's offensive in northern Syria. And Google is denying misusing data from one of the biggest healthcare providers. The company says it only accesses the data in question to build a new search tool for Ascension's hospital network. For all the news you need to start your day, check out Daybreak on your mobile phone on the Bloomberg Anywhere app. Karen.
Hannah, thank you. S&P futures down 13 points. Dow futures down 116. NASDAQ futures down 44. The DAX in Germany is down 0.8%. 10-year Treasury up 16/30 seconds. Yield 1.87%. The yield on the 2-year 1.62%. NYMEX crude oil is down 0.8% or 47 cents at 56.34 a barrel. COMEX gold is up 0.8% or $11.50 at 14.6520 an ounce. The euro 1.1011 against the dollar. The yen 108.95. And that's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Michael Barr with more on what's going on around the world. Michael.
Karen, the liaison office, which represents mainland China's authorities in Hong Kong, says that actions in the semi-autonomous territory are slipping into the abyss of terrorism. On Monday, 2 people were critically injured when a man was set on fire during an argument with demonstrators, and a police officer shot a protester. The violent protests are now in their 6th month. Former President Jimmy Carter is waking up in an Atlanta hospital after yesterday's surgery to relieve pressure on his brain. In the NBA, the Knicks and Nets lost. In the NHL, the Rangers won in overtime. The Bruins lost in the shootout. And a baseball note, former Phillies skipper Gabe Kapler has been hired as the new manager of the San Francisco Giants. Global news 24 hours a day on air and at TikTok on Twitter. Powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg, Nathan.
All right, Michael, thank you. It is 6:20 on Wall Street and live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studios. This is Bloomberg Daybreak. President Trump had a lot to say about the economy and the direction of the U.S.-China trade situation when he spoke before the Economic Club of New York yesterday. Let's get reaction now from Bloomberg Intelligence chief U.S. economist Carl Riccadonna. Good morning, Carl. For a lot of people who cover the president, it was a familiar message, but did it move the needle any for you?
Yes, it was a familiar message, but delivered in a much more sober style than the typical campaign rallies. Nonetheless, he did get some rounds of applause, especially when he offered up the possibility of further fiscal stimulus in his potential second term. What I think a lot of market participants were most focused on was any new guidance with respect to the health of the trade talks and any progress in that regard. And where we're heading in terms of trade war, trade tensions, and new tariffs. And unfortunately, we didn't get a lot of new guidance in that regard, although one of the takeaways, I think, was that maybe there's a little less progress in a material step forward in trade negotiations than what has been leaked into the press from negotiators on both sides over the last several weeks.
So does that raise concern for you that we might not see that phase one trade deal before the end of the year?
Well, he continued to offer up the possibility that we could see a phase one trade agreement, but the prospect of a material rollback in tariffs seems to be still somewhat a distant prospect. Also, the timing was supposed to initially be middle of November at the APEC summit. That timeline has clearly slipped back. So there are some key deadlines that seem to be falling by the wayside.
And part of that familiar message we heard from the president was continued criticism of the Federal Reserve not working with him, in his view, on lowering interest rates while he pursues the trade war with China. Would you expect the Fed chairman to give some reaction to that when he appears before Congress later this morning?
Well, Powell has made it very clear that he's not going to comment on the comments of elected officials, and that's specifically geared towards the president. But if the president was frustrated with the limited support that he perceives he got from the Fed to this point, he's going to be even more inflamed by the likely tone of remarks we'll hear today when Fed Chair Jerome Powell addresses the JEC, or the Joint Economic Committee of Congress. It seems like the Fed is really trying to orchestrate a soft landing, or at least a temporary pause to the easing cycle that we've seen since July of this year. They're really trying to jawbone expectations into not anticipating additional rate cuts in December. Now, that expectation is only as good as the latest trade headlines. If we suddenly see that December tariffs are likely to be implemented, the Fed may very well have to continue easing policy. But for the moment, the messaging definitely has been that 3 is the magic number, and they won't have to do further easing. And that is not going to be a welcome message from President Trump.
In our last minute here, we potentially get a headline ahead of Powell's appearance later this morning when we get the Consumer Price Index data for the month of October. What's your expectation there? Could it move the Fed?
I don't think it's going to move the Fed. So we have 2 key data points this week. One is the Consumer Price Index today. The other one, which I'll argue is the more important data point, is retail sales on Friday. At the moment, the focus is more on the health of economic activity, so a little bit more forward-looking, less focus given to those inflation metrics. So I think we'll see some rebound in October relative to what we saw in September, which was a surprisingly cool report. But the bigger focus is going to be if that sole engine of economic growth over the last couple of quarters, which has been consumer, is well positioned for a strong Q4 performance. With that being said, all eyes are on retail sales Friday morning at 8:30.
Carl Riccadonna, always good having you on. Thanks for being here. Carl Riccadonna is Chief U.S. Economist for Bloomberg Intelligence. And again, Fed Chairman Jerome Powell appears before the JEC, the Joint Economic Committee of Congress, at 11 a.m. Wall Street time. We'll have full coverage for you here on Bloomberg Radio. Ahead of that, S&P futures are lower by almost 13 points. You're listening to Bloomberg Daybreak.
This is a Bloomberg Market Minute. Wall Street looks headed for a lower open this morning. Dow futures down 106 points. Crude oil is also lower by about 0.8% at $56.37 a barrel. With earnings season winding down, investor focus has turned to trade and the timing of a Phase 1 deal between the U.S. and China. And Washington, D.C. is in the spotlight with impeachment proceedings in the House going public today. Fed Chair Jay Powell, meanwhile, will address the Joint Economic Committee of Congress. And we also have a report out today on consumer prices. Ford's new proposed pact with the United Auto Workers Union is cruising toward ratification, with almost 2/3 of workers voting in favor so far. The contract includes $6 billion in investments in U.S. facilities, a $9,000 signing bonus, and raises that take hourly wages to just over $32